Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
Our guest today is Mr. Brandt Ainsworth. Brandt is a horseman, but from an entirely different sector of this business, and I'm really looking forward to picking his brain because this is something I've always been interested in and really don't know very much about at all. Brandt grew up on a draft horse-powered sheep farm. Draft teams were used as feed teams all winter long and for farming crops like oats, barley, and corn. Using grain and corn binders, horse plows, cultivators, threshing machines, sleds, and wagons. Logging was part of Brandt's life since weaning. He started driving teams in the woods at 10 years old. The Ainsworth kept a stallion since 1986, and today's horses carry those bloodlines. Raising and breaking colts has been a part of Brandt's life since he was 10. At 14, he started competing in horse pulls and has been part of pulling since. Brandt still raises and trades draft colts, uses horses for logging and farm work, as well as many horse pulls and the occasional plowing contest using a walking plow in his pulling teams, and I'm guessing maybe the occasional passerby stuck in a ditch in the snow. In addition to draft horses, Brandt raises, trains, works, and competes with oxen. For around 25 years, Brandt has been a writer for draft horse publications like the Draft Horse Journal, Rural Heritage Magazine, the Small Farmers Journal, and so forth. He has made several instructional videos with Rural Heritage, many of which aired on RFD-TV. He is also the announcer for many draft horse events. For the past 20 years, Brandt has been teaching courses on draft horses and oxen skills. Currently, Brandt and his son Nick are focused on their YouTube channel, which shows a behind-the-scenes look into the Ainsworth family's endeavors while teaching draft horse skills. So I'm really tickled to have this conversation with you. Brandt, how are you today?
I'm great. A little cold up here, and sometimes we're the passerbys we have to pull out of the ditch on our own farm here, pull a truck out of the snow or something like that.
I'll bet that's a real kick when you get to hook up some real horsepower and pull somebody out like that. That's got to be fun every single time. Huh?
It can be, yeah. It's usually not much of a challenge for the horses. That the vehicles aren't stuck solid. They're usually moving a little bit, but yeah, it can be fun sometimes. Usually it doesn't happen at an opportune time though. You're late or somebody had to be somewhere. Or, of course you wouldn't be in the ditch if the weather wasn't bad. So, but yeah, we've done a lot of that.
As we're recording this, we're experiencing a bona fide blizzard here in South Louisiana, and I do not envy y'all having to deal with that on a regular basis. We're certainly ill-equipped for it down here, although the horses managed just fine. I did a couple posts when the blizzard was happening. We got the 25-mile-an-hour winds and the snow, and there were so many people that felt like they needed to give me advice on how to make the horses not die in the snow. It was a little bit funny, I thought, but anyway.
The best advice is let the horses be horses, and lots of hay, lots of forage, and lots of water, because the water freezes up and people overlook that. But I'm sure anybody listening from a northern climate's aware of that.
So we're going to start Brandt off with the icebreakers, and he reminded me the irony, the fact that I've been breaking ice for a couple of days, and now he finally gets to. So, Brandt, what are the odds that all those old Greek statues are really just victims of Medusa?
I don't know. That's a new one. I don't know. They could well be a victim of Medusa.
It's plausible. I mean, maybe so, huh?
I imagine they had their own version of what's it called when you touch up a photo today, Photoshop, and filters and stuff like that. And I imagine everybody wasn't quite as beautiful as they are in those old Greek statues.
You can get the old fat guy that sees Medusa, and then you go up there and kind of chisel out some abs on his statue and kind of polish him up a little bit, make him look a little better, right? More heroic.
Yeah, I'd hope somebody was looking out.
What do you think about to go to sleep?
I don't struggle with sleep at all. My head hits the pillow and I'm asleep. I've always been that way. I'm kind of the opposite of most people. I think if I think about stress and what's going on and the difficult things in life, that tends to put me to sleep. So, kind of the opposite of most people. I actually have some sleep issues that are different than a lot of people, where I tend to require a lot of sleep and get tired quite often.
Morning or evening?
I'm a morning person. I wake up early every morning. Um, and I'm fine to get to work early in the morning. Just start right in with something. I've been on a farm and had horses my whole life, so I'm used to, when the rooster crows getting started. If I'm going to do anything creative, I do it much better in the afternoon. The thoughts kind of swirl around in my head all day, and I kind of think about things, and then after lunch sometime I can start putting them together, and that's not limited to writing or even the YouTube videos. Sometimes that's training and working with horses. I tend to do better in the afternoon when I have to get creative.
How long do you dunk a cookie in milk?
Yeah, I don't dunk cookies in milk. I like cookies, and I very much like milk. Coming from the farm background I come from, this is dairy country here where I live, but my dad didn't believe in playing with your food, and by gosh, I never did. Maybe I should start trying.
What is the best horse movie?
I would say the 1940s movie, The Story of Dan Patch. Dan, if you're not familiar, was a standard bred racehorse. He held the record for the mile, the pacing a mile, for a long time. First horse to get below a minute 50 with his time. Fascinating story about Dan Patch. And the movie is an entertaining movie, but what you really want to read is the book. Crazy Good is the name of the book about Dan Patch.
I have to say, I've ridden some standard breds. There may be no breed of horse that is more likely to kind of throw you out the back door. You really have to like stay, on top of it and thinking forward. I don't know if it's the way they elevate when they go or what, but they really are one of the more challenging to ride breeds that I've ever been on. And then they have so much mobility of their legs, like you can see their legs in your vision while you're riding them. It's like being on a spider. There's just legs coming out everywhere, and it's really it's a different thing. It really is. They're pretty neat to play with.
I keep a few saddle horses here and there, and we had a saddle horse here for a long time that was a standard bred, and he was a good boy. He paced everywhere he went. If he was out in the pasture going from one end to the other, that's how he got there, was pacing. I don't think the horse knew how to trot. And he was a good boy. If you had an expert level rider on him, he would step right up to that level. And if you put a 4-year-old kid on him, he'd be a babysitter. But difficult, the shape of their back, difficult to fit a saddle to. I think standard breds tend to be that way.
What skill or technique do you not have with a horse that you admire in someone else and wish you did have?
We're going to stick with the standard breds. I would love to drive a standard bred racehorse in a race with 8 other horses bouncing around out there like a demolition derby and jockeying for position, and having that horse go as fast as he can without breaking. There's a fine line right there from pushing him from going fast to breaking into a gallop. And right behind that, the skill or talent that I'd like to have would be to drive a 6 or an 8 horse hitch in the show ring. I've driven 6 horse hitches in the field and farming. It's not the same. Driving a team in the show ring at a fast trot and maneuvering and having a line on every horse and making every horse in that hitch act as one, that's a real challenge. And I really admire what I see out of those teamsters. And that's a skill I'd love to have.
So I have to say that like my very first paid riding job was riding thoroughbred race horses, breaking them for the track and all of that stuff. The standard bred, the cart horses, like to me, that is 9,000 times more dangerous. I don't have no qualms about being on a horse in a pack, but you put me behind one on a cart with people behind me that are absolutely going to run me over if anything goes, like that just seems like it is many levels beyond in terms of danger. I can't imagine what that's got to be like. And then they're low down too, like they're not up seeing, they're like, man, that takes an iron constitution, I would think.
It sure does. And then you have the like you said, you're low down, you're staring right at your horse's rear. You don't have the visibility of the track, and you don't know how things are unfolding in front of you. And it's not like a race car where you have somebody in your ear, a pit boss or a crew chief in your ear. And when they wreck, it's bad. I mean, those the bikes turn into catapults.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm sure I admire that skill and would love to be a part of it, maybe at a really low level fun day or something. But that's, like you said, that is scary.
It's kind of like wanting to play professional football until there's a 280-pound linebacker looking at you coming your way, and then it may not be quite as much fun. Huh?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a standout horse memory?
I'm going to go all the way back to 1992. And it's not much of a memory, but we were at a plowing festival, not a contest, just a festival. And back then we used to get upwards of 100 teams of horses and some oxen, mules, and ponies at this festival, put on by the Collins Draft Horse Oxen Pony Club was our local club. And it's still a club I belong to and have a lot of fun with. And the secretary of the Percheron Association, which holds a little irony because I'm a Belgian breeder these days, mostly. But the secretary, we had Percherons back then, and secretary of the Percheron Association gave me a trophy for appreciation of what we did with the Percheron breed. And we were small potatoes. We had one stallion and 7 or 8 mares. We didn't do a lot, but he appreciated how we were plowing, and he also appreciated what we did in the breeding shed with the horses too. And when I got home that day, we had a foal on the ground, a beautiful bay foal, and we named him Rambo, and he was probably had the potential to be the best pulling horse I ever had. I'm not sure I allowed him to reach his full potential, but he was born the same day the Percheron Association gave me that award. So I think that's my standout memory.
That's pretty cool. So I'm going to have to plead ignorance here. When I think Belgium, like I'm thinking, the textbook sorrel palomino type reddish, flaxen mane and tail and all of that. I was not aware that they came in bay. So there are multiple colors to Belgians, or is that an oddity or what?
Belgians have became quite standard with that sorrel color. And roans used to be very common, and roan would be red roan. But if you look back 100 years ago, and there's some articles written by Maury Tallien, who used to own and publish the Draft Horse Journal, there were multiple colors for the Belgian breed, including black, some grays. Bay was quite popular. So like a lot of our breeds, we really took a preference to the sorrels, and the roans are making a comeback. Now, roan's a pretty color, but pretty is as pretty does. If I was going to have a stallion, I'd probably want a roan Belgian stallion because the market's a little stronger for roans than it is other things. Now, Percherons are a similar breed, one country over from France instead of Belgian. And at the time I'm talking about, 1992, we were Percheron breeders back then, actually. And we had mostly blacks. We did have a few grays, and this bay colt that I'm talking about came out of a gray mare who was not full-blooded Percheron. She was half quarter horse and half Percheron, and out of our registered stallion, black stallion. So we've probably, out of that mare, I think we may have raised 9 foals, and 2 of them were bay, and the rest were black, or sometimes black turns gray in the Percheron breed as they age.
I do have to say that the Percherons are probably, when I think of a beautiful draft horse, that's more what comes to mind. The colors and all. You get me a dapple gray draft pulling something, and you got the steam, the smoke coming out. It looks like a dragon's fire coming out of his nose. Like that's the mythical picture that I see when I think about that kind of stuff.
I'm through the years of I'm not terribly breed loyal, but I'm kind of a Belgian guy, and that's mostly what I raise. But boy, I agree with you. Dapple gray and some of the blacks are striking. And the odd thing is, in the pulling horse world, competitive pulling, 90 to 95% of these horses are Belgians, and the other 5% are Percherons, and they are dominant quite often. Josh Wickham out in Wisconsin's been breeding Percherons for years to pull, and that one team he raised just keeps breaking their own world record for lightweights. You don't see them in the heavyweights as often, and there's been a few other ones that are out of other breeding that make some really good Percheron pulling horses, and they are gorgeous when they're kept in that top condition and they shine in the summer. It's black or gray. They really have a nice look. I'll say that.
So I was aware that there are different classes of draft horses. Like we have lighter drafts, like Clydesdales, for instance, they're actually the lighter weight draft horses and all. But I thought Belgians and Percherons were heavyweight drafts. Are they not?
In general, yes. They're heavyweight drafts. Most of them are 1,700 pounds and up. Probably your average horse is between 18 and 1,900 pounds for either a Percheron or a Belgian. The Belgians carry a little more bulk. In the horse pulling world, we divide the weight classes, and we have heavyweights and lightweights, and we make the cutoff. It depends on what state you're in and where. And sometimes time of year, but usually around 3,400 pounds and under to get into the lightweight class. And the heavyweights go all the way up for a team's combined weight can be 5,000 sometimes and over. The bigger the better on the heavyweights. When the heavyweight class is good, like it was here in Western New York last year, they might pull 2,000 pounds more than the lightweights. It's hard to have good heavyweight class. It's hard to have good heavyweights. They're expensive and they're rare. For the last 8 or 9 years, until last summer, the heavyweights really made a comeback. The lightweights would pull almost as much, if not more, on some weeks than the heavyweights. When heavyweights are right, it's really impressive.
So I kind of like there that they're not breaking that up by breed or anything, but we're actually weighing the horse and determining that. Would you ever see somebody with a hitch of like a Belgium and a Percheron? Would that, or is that a taboo thing that you're either a Belgium guy or a Percheron, but nobody's going to mix them in the singular team, or what?
Pulling horses, competitive pulling, is very democratic. We don't care. We do have some bloodlines we follow, and like certain stallions, but we don't care if the horse is a Morgan if he pulls or whatever. Generally, those are the 2 breeds you see in the pulling ring. We're starting to see a few more Suffolks, which is a bit more of a rare breed. They're an English breed, but it's quite unusual to see a pair of Percherons. Usually your Percheron will be hooked with a Belgian quite often. the team that I referenced that kept breaking that currently holds the lightweight world record and kept breaking their own record are full brothers. And one of them is black as could be, shiny black, kind of he's got a flowing mane. A lot of times we clip the mane, and I can get into that later why we clip the manes, but just kind of a long, lean, athletic looking horse. And his full brother that they hook right beside him, the Percheron's name is Junker, because that's what they told him he was going to be when he was a foal, because of his conformation. And his full brother is Duke. Duke is a short muscle man of a Belgian, and they're full brothers, but they do have some Belgians somewhere in their history. And the one is a sorrel, looks just like any Belgian or halflinger, palomino colored, and the other one is black. So we really don't care about color. A lot of us prefer and like a certain color, but if it'll pull and bring home a blue ribbon, we're going to pull anything. Beauty doesn't matter that much either. You know, there's been a lot of ugly horses that wins horse pulls too.
I like it. I like that a lot. What would you say is the most important quality of a horseman?
Do you want a short answer or a long answer?
Up to you.
I've always thought about this question a lot ever since I was a kid, and I think the answer has evolved for me. And when I was young, I would have absolutely said timing. I'm coming from a sheep herding background, and we trained a lot of border collies, and I understood the importance of timing. And then as I got a little older into my teenage years, I would have said consistency. And I do still think that's the key to excellence. And then I may have went, as I got into Oxen, I may have went with body language. And body language is an important thing, even with horses. It might be the most underrated quality. Patience, the ability to control your own emotions, the ability to control your voice. Our horses do a lot of voice commands. All of those have been the most important thing for me through the years. But I think they can all be answered under one big umbrella term: self-awareness. If you have self-awareness, you have good timing, you have patience, you can control your emotions, you have consistency. You know, it's a pretty good umbrella term that'll cover everything. So that's my short answer, is self-awareness.
I like it. I think that's very applicable. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer?
Well, I I know there's a survey out there that says average American, 80% of Americans think they're better drivers than average. That number's got to be off by at least 30%. And I think we tend to overestimate our abilities. With that said, I'm going to give myself a pretty high score. When I need to, I can put a trailer in a remarkable place, especially if there's people around or something. I'm a bit of a show pony. On my best days, I'm a 9 or a 9.5, but I could go all the way down to maybe a 7 if nobody's watching and I'm not paying attention. And but I tend to believe that most of the people most horsemen probably are pretty good at backing a trailer up, because it takes a lot of the same skills. You have to be very observant. You have to be in the moment. You have to have extreme focus, and you just have to bite the bullet and do it. So I'll bet you a lot of the horsemen are pretty good at backing up a trailer.
This is becoming one of my favorite questions. I have to say, it really is. And yeah, I would expect most of us are certainly better than average. We get a little more practice than if what I'm seeing as I'm driving down the road is any indication, most people have no clue what a trailer is or what might be involved for another person pulling one, and so forth. So if you put all 330 million Americans in the hat, I bet we are tens. But compared to one another, then maybe that opens up the scale a little bit. But anyway,
I think the real question is, how do your peers rate you? I think that's a more reliable answer than how you rate yourself on your driving skills and backing up skills.
that might be you could say that, like, backing up to a trailer to hook up, that could be the true test of a marriage right there, because that can be the part that gets things going. But
yes, it could.
bay or sorrel, do you have a favorite color?
This is a touchy subject for me because I like Belgians and I breed and I train Belgians. Your standard Belgian color is sorrel. We do have some roans, and a lot of the roans look more sorrel than anything. And I don't like all bays, but the two prettiest horses I ever had, and I'm a sucker for pretty horses, are my old Rambo horse, and in the barn right now, Elvis. And both of them are a blood red bay with black points, and the dapples come out, and they got muscles coming out their ears, and a beautiful head and one white foot. And I don't think they get any prettier than that. So as much as I want to say a different color, I'm gonna go with bay, with the qualifier. Everything has to be the right shade of bay.
That's fair enough. Dogs or cats?
Dogs. I've always trained a lot of dogs. We grew up training border collies to herd sheep and cows. I've had coon hounds when I was younger. I've trained bird dogs. I just enjoy dogs, but cats are not as far a distant number two as you'd think they are. I really, really like cats. I like just observing cats and watching them play with each other or hunt or walk along the edge of a board on the horse stall or something like that.
Do you have a favorite breed of dog?
Border collie, I would say. Yeah. I really like a nice Springer Spaniel, and there's several breeds I like, but border collies, there's nothing close, I guess. I really enjoy a good border collie.
If they fit your personality, then there's almost nothing else like that. But if they don't, if you're not used to a high drive, then they may cause you to have a mental breakdown or something like that. You're gonna love them or hate them, and there's nothing in between. Huh? Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Well, it's funny. I don't particularly care if people enjoy it. That's good. Oddly enough, I really like pineapple. I've got one upside down hanging on my door. No, I don't. But I do enjoy. I don't have a pineapple on the door, but I do. I do enjoy pineapple, and I do enjoy pizza. But I've never tried it together. I've never tried a pineapple on a pizza, so maybe I'll have to rectify that.
Oh, thank God I hadn't just taken a sip of coffee when you said that. That was beautiful. Thank you for that. If anyone doesn't know what an upside down pineapple is signifying, I would invite you to Google that at your own peril. Would you tell us your horse industry related pet peeve?
Oh, my New Year's resolution this year is to try to not be negative and to adhere to what our grandmothers always said. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. But we all have a lot of pet peeves, and it's so I'm gonna break my resolution and name one. I guess I would have to go with, boy, and this is more broad than just horses, but internet know-it-alls, people who just have all the answers, but can't apply it or have never tried to apply it.
Yep, that is one of the perils of our time, I guess. Yeah, I do know what you mean.
And I'll say on my YouTube channel, I get a lot of comments, and I've had very few negative comments about the horses or anything I'm doing with the horses. Even if I fault myself and say, man, I shouldn't have showed that or something, nobody else says it. But when I'm logging, and I'm probably closer to an expert at logging than I am with horses, actually. I get a lot of negative comments and the internet know-it-alls come out of the woodwork for logging. And logging's a lot more objective. It's just right or wrong. There's a right and a wrong way to do things. Horses can be subjective on a lot of levels, but there shouldn't be that much disagreement with logging and the dynamics and the physics of getting a tree safely to the ground. But so I guess I'm complaining about internet know-it-alls, but on the horse related side, I don't get it that much on my YouTube channel.
Well, we'll hope that the world doesn't take that as a challenge to accept. And I do want to talk with you about, I tell you what, I'm going to on the fly make up a new question for you. Steel or Husqvarna?
Oh, I run Husqvarna or Johnson Red, which is the same thing. It's Chevy GMC. It's the same thing. I started with steel chainsaws and very much like steel chainsaws. I ran them for years. Back in the early 2000s, I was doing a lot of cutting for log skidders and running a saw a lot, and the vibration was hurting my hands. And steel had a rubber anti-vibration mount, and Husqvarna had a coil spring. So I switched to Husqvarna, and and they're a little bit cheaper also, and I've stayed with them ever since. And now steel does have a coil spring mount, but I've stuck with Husky because that's what I have and that's what I get parts for. I've learned not to be terribly brand loyal with breeds of horses or chainsaws or pickup trucks or anything. You're going to have good and bad in all of them.
So I'm a steel guy. I actually have been running a saw since I was about 13. I had a firewood business when I was a kid and cut down a bunch of trees and stuff. And that's how I bought my first horse, my first truck and all that stuff. In fact, I still have my original chainsaw I bought when I was 13. It's a steel 034 Wood Boss. Still runs, still just as hard to start as it was 35 years ago. And all my favorite tool that I own. Proudly still have the original wrench that came with it and everything. I've never owned a Husky, but I have heard that they actually change the angle that you're supposed to sharpen the tooth at. So is that true? And if so, did that take you a little while? I'm assuming you're a freehand guy and not using a gauge or anything. So did that take a little while to get used to, or is that just
Well, I don't
myth?
know if any one brand particularly changed the angle. What has happened is the chainsaws run so much faster, just like a lot of gas engines in our car, and they have a lot more horsepower, but not as much torque. And to compensate for that, you do tend to run a little bit sharper angle, more like a 35-degree angle instead of a 30-degree angle. Kind of a diesel compared to a gas is what the modern chainsaws are. So a little bit of an adjustment, but a well-sharpened chainsaw at any of the angles is going to work well for you. My first chainsaw wasn't a world different than yours. It was I grew up running 41 and 51 steels that were my dad's. And the first one I bought with my own money was a 38 Magnum steel. So,
Well, this one, I have a very proud day. I got a picture from it. There was an old pecan tree, and I had a 2-acre garden that I sold vegetables out of when I was a kid. And the deal for the plot of land was the man wanted to put a house there, and this old pecan tree was in the way. And it was a big pecan tree. I mean, like a 4.5 foot diameter tree. And I, with young enthusiasm, I told him I'd be happy to cut that tree down. Now I have a chainsaw with a 20-inch bar. And so I did in fact cut the tree down, but it was like a 12-hour job. I'm having, I mean, I was way up underneath there and stuff. I consider that the day I became a man. Like that was the trial by fire. That was yeah, started at 6 o'clock in the morning. It fell at 5:34 p.m. and it went down very softly. It was the most anticlimactic thing that you could imagine. I mean, I wanted the big crash and all. I didn't get it, but anyway.
Yeah, I spent most of my life logging, even in big timber, with a 20-inch bar. I've occasionally used a 24, but with good techniques, you can fall a very big tree with a a short bar. The Western guys pick on us and give us a hard time, and I think it's friendly banter because they're working on a totally different type of tree and a totally different type of terrain. So I like a 20-inch bar as well, even in really big timber. Most every tree I cut's bigger than 20 inches. But you go a couple different directions and you've got it nailed.
Well, that was the problem. Like this tree, I could run 20 inches all the way around, and I still had like a 2-foot core I couldn't touch. That was so I had to cut holes big enough for me to crawl in to get to the center, and it was a day. But anyway,
so some of this is harder to explain on a podcast than if you were in front of me. But the first step in cutting a tree is cutting the notch, a pie-shaped piece out of the front of the tree, and that dictates what direction the tree is going to go. And if you bore your chainsaw right in the center of the notch, even if that's 50 inches wide or 48 inches, you bore your chainsaw right in the center, that 20-inch bar will reach a long way toward the back, and you can cut on a big tree like a 48-incher, you can cut 18 inches out of the center, and you still have plenty of strength holding that tree all the way to the ground. Your hinge wood acts just like a hinge on a door, even though there's a gap in the center. And I always relate that to standing with your feet shoulder wide. You still have good stability left and right, but there's nothing joining your feet. And that's the easiest way to cut a big tree with a short bar. And if some of the Western guys who like those really big bars were to press me to the fire on it, I'd say, yeah, probably is silly. Just get a big bar, I guess. But
I need a 36-inch bar like once a year, and I need a 16 or 20-inch bar once a week. And so, it's way more money to step up to one of those big saws, considering I would only use it every once. And then if I use it once a year, the carburetor would be gummed. It would be way more headache. So I'd rather I'll fight the fight when I have to, rarely. And that's way more teeth to sharpen too, right?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yep.
What is your least favorite barn chore?
Probably shoveling manure. And I like spreading it. I like hooking the horses. We use the horses on the spreader. I like doing that. But actually shoveling the stalls, that's not a lot of fun. And everybody tries to kind of give themselves psychological games, kind of like when it's cold and you try to think warm thoughts, but it's not fun by anybody's estimation.
What about a most favorite barn chore?
I would say feeding hay. I enjoy feeding hay. I grew up with a father who grew up farming with horses, and they didn't have in a time before hay balers. So we don't touch the hay very often. We don't pick up a couple slabs of hay or anything with our hands. We use a pitchfork and pitch it into the mangers. And I don't know why, but I get some satisfaction out of that. And I like to push a lot of hay on horses. I like them to have free choice of hay, and it just makes me feel good to put it in front of them.
So, Brandt, I have a new question that you were cool enough to offer me. And so, how much of your training has come about accidentally? So, in other words, you didn't mean for this to happen. Something just kind of stars aligned. This happened, and you went, "Oh, wow, I'm going to keep doing that."
Probably more than we realize. Probably in the 10% neighborhood, I would think. Growing up, we had an old dairy barn, and it was converted to horse stalls on one end, and we were always working on the horse stalls. And I don't think we owned a skill saw. My dad was a logger and a farmer, and we did all the work with chainsaws with the horses in the barn, and they got used to the chainsaw noise and desensitized. And that was not some great training technique. That's just what we did to fix the barn. And then I remember one time I had a team that came to me to break for somebody else or to to re-break. They had some bad habits, and they wouldn't stop backing up. They would back up on a wagon, a cart, empty, whatever, until they hit something. And that's not real uncommon with draft horses. And I was having a heck of a time getting that team over that. And I just got so sick of it out of frustration. I started backing them up the length of a field. It was a 50-acre meadow. We'd just taken the hay off it. And I went from one end of that field to the other. And I was just being mean, actually. I didn't think I was training anything. And I did it for probably 2 hours. And when I got done, you could say whoa at a whisper from 100 yards away, and that team would stop. So I kind of accidentally learned that training technique, and I've used it a few times on horses with that habit. I think if we're honest with ourselves, probably quite a bit more of the techniques we all use came about accidentally as opposed to a great stroke of genius.
I think for sure. I would be surprised if it's as low as 10%. I think it's probably more than that for most of us. There's always that one quirky horse that caused you to do something weird, and boom, a light bulb goes off, So it's a great question. Crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
I would probably say smooth. I've never been exposed to crunchy a lot. Whenever I have, I've liked it, but the familiarity leads me to smooth peanut butter.
Okay. It's easier to spread on a piece of bread, that's for sure. The crunchy digs in and tears a little bit, but I think it's worth it. But I'm not a real big peanut butter guy, to be honest with you. Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
I have a whole cast of about a dozen imaginary friends, and it started to entertain the kids when they were little. And each one of these characters has a backstory and a voice and a unique personality, and I can't quit doing it. I'll be alone or in inappropriate places at a grocery store or a meeting at the school or something, and I'm doing a voice to Pedro. What do you mean, Pedro? You do Pipsqueak. He's the best. Yeah, see, Pipsqueak had to interrupt. I didn't interrupt. This is about me, not you, Brandt. You get your own show. Yeah, whatever. So, yeah, I've got a whole cast of those characters. Grandpa Milford. He doesn't like Pipsqueak. He tries to get him with his cane all the time.
That's great. I'm seeing a series of children's books or something for you in retirement here.
I don't know why I never did more with that as far as its own YouTube channel or anything. I just, even if it didn't make any money, at least it would be an outlet, because I can't stop doing it. I just, all the time. We were driving to a football game once when my daughter was cheerleading, and the kid said, I'll bet you can't quit doing Pipsqueak for the rest of the trip. It was about 20 minutes, about a mile down the road. I said, hey, did you guys see that sign and what that sign said? we couldn't quit, or I couldn't quit.
I like it. That's quirkiness in a good way, for sure.
I drove a team of pulling horses once at a contest, Daniel. I grabbed onto the rope things and I said, go, go. And I won the trophy. Yeah, it looked like Brandt was getting the trophy, but I wanted the trophy. It was all me driving. And the judge was crying. He was laughing so hard. It was a good time. I just wanted to tell you.
So is this Pipsqueak as well?
Yeah, I'm Pipsqueak. I've got the really smooth voice. I'm a good singer. I can hit all the notes that Brandt can't.
Yeah. I like it. So Pipsqueak is your tequila, kind of is what it sounds like there.
Yes. Yeah.
Thoughts or feelings? So do you consider yourself more an intuitive, go by the gut guy, or more logical, rational, cerebral kind of guy?
A mixture of both. And it might be as much as a 50-50 mixture of both. And I think most people are. Maybe some people balance that a little bit different, but most people aren't too far out of whack with that. I think you have to consider feelings and thoughts together to come up with a good decision, I think.
What would you have been professionally if not a horseman or longer?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is a farmer, but it's so hard to get into farming these days. And so honestly, I think I would have leaned toward some kind of a broadcaster, a sports broadcaster. I've always enjoyed that. I announced some hometown football games and a lot of horse events, and I think that would have been a fun career choice.
So do you feel do you have a challenge keeping the voices out of those deals, or do you bring them right in and everybody knows what's going on, or what?
Oh, it depends. You know, when my kids used to cheerlead and be on the teams, I would bring the voices out just to see their reaction, and they'd pretend they hated it and they thought it was funny. At a horse pull, if I'm announcing, I'll do that once in a while, and Pipsqueak will argue with me.
There's nothing to argue about, Brandt. I'm always right.
Just leave me alone. I'm doing this. So
I don't know why he thinks he gets to talk when it's my turn.
So yeah, back and forth. I get the voices out some. If it's a really professional horse pull, you know, when we're getting a dozen teams and it's a big setting, no, I try to really focus on announcing what's in front of me, and I think that's what's lacking in announcers at all levels and in all sports, even at the highest levels. They're more worried about being entertaining than they are telling you what's going on in the game, the down and distance, how much time is left in the quarter or something like that. And so it is with in my game, horse pulling. You know, that's the most important thing for the audience is to hear how far somebody pulled it and how many teams qualified for this load and that sort of thing. And the jokes, the entertainment, the story, that's all a distant second to actually calling the event.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
I'm situational with that. There are times when I am snap of a fingers decisive, and other times when I'm very wishy-washy. There's times maybe if I'm pulling heavyweight horses, I don't know which horses I'm going to take to the pull until I'm getting ready to load the trailer. So it can be situational. I can go either way. If there's something I really don't, on the negative things, I think I tend to be a lot more decisive. No, I don't want to do that, or choose the least painful option. On the positive things, maybe if I have two good choices ahead of me, I'm probably not decisive.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
Good leather lines, driving lines. Very specific about them. I like the feel of the leather in my own hands, the length of the cross lines. So each driving line on a team of horses is like a single line, just like a long split rein on a saddle horse with a fork coming off from each one. So when the right line goes to the right side of the bit on both horses, and so does the left line, and they cross in the middle. And I'm very specific about the pattern those lines are made, the material they're made from, the length of those lines, the way we attach the lines to the bit. I much prefer some fasteners than others. And right behind that, I am a big fan of an old-fashioned tool called double spreaders. And if you notice in a lot of old horse pictures, they use double spreaders. And spreaders are simply a guide for your driving lines to go through. And if you use double spreaders correctly, they hold your lines up higher in a safer position, and there's less slack to pull out of your lines before you make contact with the bit. And also, used correctly, double spreaders will make a bit pull straight back on the horse's mouth, much more in line with what you're doing with a single horse or riding a horse, as opposed to pulling sideways on one side of the horse's mouth, as it would be using a team without spreaders, double spreaders specifically.
Well, I have many more questions about that because all of the complexities and nuances of how horses are harnessed and how that works, I don't understand. So I really want to pick your brain on that stuff later.
I have an opinion on all of it, I guarantee.
Are your hands or your legs better? So you told me to ask you the riding question just like I would anybody else, and I don't know if your legs really come into play very much with doing this sort of stuff, but obviously your hands would. So
Uh, well, if you're talking about riding a horse, my legs are better. Surprisingly, I use my legs a lot. I have a pretty good seat and I ride really light when I'm riding a horse. There were times when I used to trail ride a lot more. I would be the biggest person at the trail ride, riding the smallest horse, and my horse would be the last one to get tired. But so maybe I'm bragging and a little bit on my legs that I do use my legs well, but I don't use my hands well when I'm riding a horse. I tend to be heavy-handed because I'm used to driving two horses with a 20 feet back where you have to hold up all that slack on the lines, and I just tend to be a little heavy-handed. I'm in their mouth a little more than I need to be when I ride. As far as legs, when you're driving, you need to be able to walk and chew gum. I mean, you're not always sitting on the wagon seat driving a team. Quite often you're walking, and a lot of that comes right down to your posture and your body language. And it all connects, every bit of it, right through your hands into those lines. But you don't, at the basic level, you need to be somewhat coordinated so you don't stumble and fall down, because you can't be watching where you're walking every minute. You have to watch ahead of you where the horses are going. So it's a little bit more of a challenge than it looks like, walking behind a team of horses.
I could imagine, and you're also not always right behind them. If they're skidding a log or something, you're going to be off to the side a little bit, and you sure don't want a log pulled by two Belgians to knock you down. That could be catastrophic, I'm sure. So I would bet you have to be pretty situationally aware and not the kind of person that trips if you come across a little something here and there. You got to be pretty well on your feet. So yeah.
Well, it starts with a couple things. It's a big difference in your horses if you're driving behind them, a pair of horses, a team of horses. Well, a pair, because 8 is a team or 3 is a team, but a pair of horses, if you're driving way off to the left side, the right hand horse will, the dynamics of your driving lines will cause that horse to be behind 1 foot. If you're driving way off to the left side, your left horse will be behind a foot. If you're driving in the middle, they should be dead even. And if you know you're going to be spending a lot of time driving off to one side, you compensate with your lines, or maybe even your bits or cross lines or something like that. But another thing is, make sure you walk back far enough on the lines. If anything were to break on those eveners, the eveners are the part that actually hook the harness to the log or plow or wagon, whatever you're pulling. If anything were to break along that line, those eveners will come right straight back and could hit you right in the leg and cause an injury. And if skidding logs, if you walk in front of the log, that log will pick up all the brush and little sticks and twigs in the woods and beat you in the back of the shins with them. So if you walk behind the front of the log, you're behind all that stuff. So there's, the simplest thing comes into play. It's the fundamentals mean so much, just like any activity that's a sport or anything. It's the better you do at the fundamentals, the more success you'll have.
What is the best smell in the barn?
I would say the horses themselves, particularly in the spring when they first go out on pasture. There's just a different smell about a horse when they're eating grass and when they're outside on pasture than there is any other time of the year with those horses.
Sweet, salty, or spicy?
Oh, at times I like all of them, but I'm a little bit wimpy on being spicy, but probably salty. I would have to say if you nailed me down on one.
So I'm going to say here, that's another one of those trends I've seen. There's a lot of people that have picked salty, and I think that has to do with we tend to be people that are working outside and sweating throughout the day and all, and I think we kind of crave salt a little more than most people do. So there may be a new T-shirt line. I don't know.
So there's salt mines near here, Mount Morris, New York, probably 40 miles from here. And Morton Salts, and maybe Morton Salt doesn't want everybody seeing these, but all the workers wear shirts with the Morton Salt logo, and it says "Don't be a salty bitch." Maybe that could be part of your t-shirt line.
I take we have just a little anomaly in my area. We have salt mines here as well, and we actually have a freshwater lake that wound up getting pierced, and there were people out on it fishing, and it drained into the salt dome. So they're out there on the water in 5 feet of water, and then in like the course of 20 minutes, it turned into a mud flat and flooded the salt mines. So then when they reconstituted the lake, it went from freshwater to saltwater, even though it is a landlocked lake. So it's not very far from the Gulf of Mexico or anything, but but it's in fact Lake Panier is the name of it.
That had to be a major event. That had to be a major event with the DEC and conservation.
Well,
in your area.
This was quite a while ago. It might have been probably in the 80s or something, maybe even the 70s when it happened. But anyway, like now they have what was a freshwater lake you can go catch blue point crabs on and stuff like that.
It's amazing how resilient Mother Nature is, just to change itself like that when needed.
Absolutely. What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Well, I am remarkably unfamiliar with dinosaurs and deep sea creatures, but I kind of like Dino, the purple dinosaur from the Flintstones. Does that count?
Okay, yeah, that counts. I will definitely accept that.
I almost went with the one Fred Flintstone rides as an excavator, but Dino's a little cooler. He just seems like a little more fun.
And I guess in your particular line of work, you get to fool with large beasts anyway, so maybe that dims the fascination toward other ones for people that don't have that right in their own backyard all the time.
Yeah.
And then the last question, have you ever had a UFO encounter?
I've been on a lot of benders when I was younger, so I can't definitively tell you no, but in my conscious mind, no, I've never seen a UFO, but I've had a few lost weekends, and something fun might have happened in there, and I might have met some Martians and had a good time with them. I don't know.
No, and where you are, you're not all that far from all these drones over New Jersey or whatever's going on over there right now. So
well, I guess UFO. I have seen that. If drones qualify, yeah, we've seen them right here in Western New York, right, not far from home.
Well, it just means unidentified. It doesn't have to be aliens or anything. It could be, who knows what it is, really. So,
well, I never thought of myself as somebody that would see an unidentified flying object, but I guess I have then, if the drones count. And I wasn't even on a bender when I saw them. I don't do that anymore. I haven't in a while. But
well, I've tabulated your score here, Brandt, and you are at 4,834 points, which makes you our reigning high score champion of all time. And that entitles you to either an awkward silence or a genuine compliment, your choice.
Well, I got enough of an ego where I'm going to go with the genuine compliment.
Okay. Well, I will say, you approached me about this, and I was really tickled that you did, because I have been wanting to talk to somebody from your particular world, but I had no end there. I didn't know like who to approach or what was what. And also, and kind of getting to know you, we've had some conversations before this podcast and all. I really appreciate your openness. There's really no part of this that you're not willing to talk about, and anything. You've even talked with me about some mental health challenges that we'll talk about later on. and some other things like weight cutting for the classes, the heavyweight, lightweight stuff, and all of that, and docking of tails and all the clipping of manes. And I really appreciate the openness of that, particularly given that I know so little about this. It would be very easy for you to just pull the wool over my eyes and only show the light parts, but you have it in your heart to really kind of explain all of it, maybe the good, the bad, the ugly, and why it may appear to be good, bad, or ugly, but isn't, it's not what you think it is. It's really this or whatever. And I think particularly in agriculture these days, we need more ambassadors that are willing to do that and kind of have the real talks and so forth. And so I applaud you on all of those fronts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just find maybe it's the announcer in me, but the awkward silence is too awkward for me.
My wife hates those too. They're my favorite, but I mean, hey, different strokes for different folks, right?
Well, I'll tell you something else. Since you complimented me about being open, and we're talking about awkward silences. I am not the world's most patriotic guy. I was born in '76, and we all rode the wave of that all through my childhood. But when I'm announcing an event and somebody, particularly if somebody sings the national anthem, or even if it's just played, a recording of it, and I look around and I'm holding the mic or whatever I'm doing, and I'm watching the reaction of the other participants, the audience, and the people, or the singer, you're going to get an awkward silence when that's over. And it's almost always because I am too choked up. I've got tears in my eyes, and I can't put a sentence together. I can't get it to come out of my mouth anyway, watching what the national anthem means to everybody. And that's not the only case where that happens. Sometimes we'll have to give a special award, a lifetime achievement or something like that. And you'll get a awkward silence because I just can't, I'm too emotional. But it happens almost every time with the national anthem.
I'm there with you. I would say we're pretty privileged in the circles that you and I run in. When you're at one of those events, you don't have people that kneel and things like that. I would have a pretty tough time handling that sort of stuff. While I definitely am appreciative of the First Amendment disrespect toward our country and all. I wish we were all a little more proud to be an American than what we see a lot of times. But anyway.
Well, what touches me emotionally is just what it means to the people, to the people I see, and you can tell they're reflecting. And it is difficult to stand with your hat off and your hand on your heart and look at the flag when you're getting a team of horses ready, or if I'm announcing a horse show, when you're trying to get saddled up or whatever, and you're halfway in the middle of it, and we hit you with the national anthem, and everybody does their best. I've always expected a runaway, or at least a horse to humorously walk off or something, because nobody could hold it, because we're trying to honor the ceremony.
Well, the first question always is, would you give us a 30,000-foot view of what it is that you do in the horse world?
Well, I encompass a broad area in the draft horse world, and I'm a lot more broad than most people in the draft horse business. So I do small scale of raising foals. I haven't kept a stallion in years, but I do keep mares, and I get them bred. I train horses for myself mostly, but we train quite a few outside horses. I train horses for people who are already horsemen quite often. I'm not good at training a horse down to a level where anybody can drive it and they're robotic. I'd rather train you up to a level. I do a lot of logging and farming with my draft horses. I teach a lot of clinics. I shouldn't say a lot, but I teach a couple or maybe a few every year. I enjoy that aspect. I do a little bit of writing, and I compete at draft horse pulls and the occasional show with the pulling horses. I'll put them right in the farm horse division of a horse show. I do the same types of thing with oxen. I raise and train oxen and compete with oxen, both farming and competition and logging with the oxen. So it's a pretty broad area. And I guess our focus right now is showing what we do in the YouTube channel that we have. And it's simply my name, Brandt Ainsworth, for the YouTube channel.
We'll certainly have links to his YouTube channel in the show notes, and I would really encourage y'all to go check that out. He's got some short videos, he's got long videos with lots of explanation. There's a little bit of everything in there, and it's all just fun to watch these massive horses just moving stuff around too. So, well, I'm really interested in the oxen, but I'll hold off on that for a little bit. So I have to say, when you were talking before about the average size of some of these horses and Belgium's being 1,700 pounds and stuff, that surprised me a little bit. I would have thought they were bigger generally. So is there a misperception among us Gentiles who aren't in this world about how big these horses really are?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of misperception. That's a good word. One of my favorite sayings is we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And a lot of people saw a pair of draft horses or the Budweiser Clydes or something when they were 10 years old. And now we see them again when they're in their 30s and they're not near as big. Well, you're 5'10" now and you were 4'10" back then, or something like that. So there's a little of that. 17 or 8, somewhere between 17 and 1800, I would guess, is your average height, and right around 17 hands. But that's a lot bigger than most people realize. Most people just don't have any idea how big of a horse that really is. And they can get big from there. I mean, I've saw probably 3 horses weigh in at 2,800 pounds for one individual horse. And you go to any heavyweight horse pull, you'll see a lot of 2,500 and 2,400 pound horses there. But some of this is also misrepresentation. And maybe it's not even malicious. Maybe the people just don't realize how big 17 hands is, or 18 hands, or how much a ton is. And a lot of people will tell you, my horses are 2,100 pounds and 18 hands. Put them on a set of scales or actually measure their withers, and they're not. And it happens that way. I guarantee, whatever your hobby is, I guarantee a lot of people have similar stories where things aren't quite as good as we believe. I'm not as good as I remember. What's the saying? The older I get, the better I was. Yeah, that's kind of how it is. And that's not to say there's not a lot of big horses. And generally that's fairly harmless. And we like to say and show how big our horses are, because it is an impressive thing. Where it becomes harmful is people like to brag about the collar size of the horse. I would say your average horse, well, the guys at the collar shops tell me it's 26 inches from the throat to the top of the collar. It's a 26-inch collar, and it used to be 24. So horses are getting bigger. Definitely they are. But people like to brag and say, I've got a team that wears a 30-inch collar. Well, you're putting a 30-inch collar on there, but that's not what they need. That's like wearing a size 15 shoe if you only have a size 12 foot. And you can have a lot of issues because of that. And, and it's your ego getting in the way sometimes. Or maybe you're new at it and somebody told you, boy, that team looks like they need a 30-inch collar and they really need a 27-inch collar or something like that. And so that's what you buy. Now that's what you have. You spend a lot of money on the collars.
So I would imagine that kind of the demand for pulling horses isn't nearly as high as it might have been 150 years ago. And so do y'all have challenges finding the tack and the traces, the hames, the collars, the all of these things, or are there still people that are out there specializing in this stuff and still producing high quality work, or what?
Well, you're exactly right. The demand for draft horses in general, not the pulling horses so much, but draft horses in general is not what it used to be, especially for actual working the teams. It really started to decline in the 20s with the invention of the tractor, and the tractor companies had such good terms. Whereas if you bought a team of horses, it was money on the barrelhead, and if you bought a tractor, it was terms. But then the Great Depression came, and there was a resurgence of horses because it was a lot more affordable, and it's renewable and a lot more sustainable. And there was a nice resurgence through the late 30s and early 40s. And then by the time the mid 50s came around, yeah, it was on its nose. And it started to rebuild again in the 70s. And what it was, a lot of guys who were born in the 20s, like my father, were getting older, and they remembered fondly growing up farming with horses, and they got back into it as a kind of a hobby or a full-time thing for some of the guys. And it brought about a new boom in the draft horses from the 80s on. But what saves our bacon is the Amish in terms of, I'd have to say, in terms of breeding as well, and in terms of the equipment. I don't know of a single place that manufactures collars that's not Amish, and there are very few places that make harnesses that are not Amish. And, like any product, the Amish build for what the market is, and there's a strong market for pulling style harnesses and hames and collars, and so the Amish manufacture them. And it's the heavy equipment for pulling, competitively pulling, and even logging is heavier than your average equipment you'd use for just farm work or logging. And so that is where we find that stuff, is Amish places. And there are some mail order places, but generally they're sourcing from the Amish and offering it to you for sale online.
Well, that makes complete sense. And I'll say the first draft horse I ever messed with, she was a big Belgium mare that older man that I was doing some work for in college, he went up to Amish territory in Pennsylvania with his wife on vacation, and he came back with a Belgium mare that was bred, and a month later a Clydesdale filly showed up. And so now I had a couple of draft horses to deal with. And I have to say, the Belgian mare, she was much of a horse, and if she was having a bad day, she could be a handful to deal with. And he was telling me that they would, like, she was probably 10 months bred when she came, and looking at her, you could not tell at all. She was just as fit as could be. She had been working till the day that he pulled her, and he said they would work her till the day they fold, give them one day off, and then back to work the next day. So those horses were just incredibly fit and everything. And she gave birth to what I would have to say is like a 200-pound foal the day it hit the ground. That was the biggest foal I've ever seen in my life. We had a 6-month-old quarter horse baby at the same time, and that Belgium foal hit the ground bigger than the 6-month-old quarter horse baby
Yeah.
did. That thing was huge. So that was my first introduction to draft horses.
And that's brings up a couple points as far as, and this is not my field of expertise, even though I've raised many foals. Get that mare some exercise, and maybe not quite as extreme as what you're talking about, but growing up on the farm, we worked them right up till the day they foaled. Now, we generally didn't put them back to work for a good while after that, but we didn't need to either. We had other options with horses. and usually we work them up to within a month of foaling, and we were kind of cautious about it, especially backing up a heavy load, because horses wear what we call a britchin that goes kind of under their tail and around the rear of a horse. And if they were to push too hard, I've always heard, and I've never heard of a concrete example of this, but the rumor is if a horse pushes too hard on that britchin, they can cause damage to the foal. So we were always careful of that, but we did work them. And it was, the horses were better for it. Now, the next point that brings up, you're going to have to edit this out. I can't think. Oh, okay. I've got myself now.
Sure.
The next point that brings up is the condition draft horses can be in, especially a working team, like on an Amish farm or an actual working farm or a logging team or any competitive pulling team. Most people have no idea what kind of condition a horse can get in and what it's like for them to work that hard. The closest would come maybe endurance horses, can be in that kind of shape. And again, going back to foaling, not only is it healthy for your horse to work throughout foaling for your mare, you're a lot less likely to have injuries when the horses are in really good shape. When they worked every day, the muscles, the tendons, the joints, everything is stronger, and you have a lot less injuries because of it.
Do y'all have like traditionally we would wait till the horse is 2 or 3 or 4 before we would break them to ride and kind of put them to work, and then we would be a little more careful the younger they are, as to how much work we're going to put them into? Is there kind of a similar rule with driving and harness horses and all, where I would imagine you don't have 2-year-olds out there skidding big logs, but how do y'all go about that?
It's remarkably similar, and so is the debate behind that. And I try to, and there we go with thoughts and versus feelings. I try to chase the thoughts and the hard evidence on that, and quiz every vet I talk to about that. Traditionally, horses have been trained as 2-year-olds and worked not as hard as you would an adult horse, moderately as a 2-year-old, work them a little more as a 3-year-old. And then from 4 on, as far as like farm work and stuff goes, you're in a really good place. There are people that just don't like to see a 2-year-old work. I've taken some criticism for pushing a 2-year-old too hard. My opinion, and everybody goes back to when the joints are closed, and that doesn't have a lot to do with it. Why, whether that's closed or not, I don't understand what they think is going to happen, how that's going to damage a horse just because everything's not fully closed yet. But where I've gone completely the other way with horses is the maturity level mentally. And as we would relate that to our own selves, a 5-year-old horse still isn't mature. They're along the lines of maybe what a 17 or 18-year-old person would be. I've never physically hurt a horse by working them too young, and I don't think I've ever seen that. But mentally, especially competitive pulling horses, mentally, you can hurt them. Especially competitive pulling horse, because it's all in their head. The difference in strength between your first place team and your last place team at a horse pull isn't much. It's the difference in what they think they can do. And I'm sure it's kind of that way with weightlifters. And you never want to hurt that horse's confidence. Now, you may have ruined the horse in the pulling ring and he'll never win another blue ribbon. He'll be just fine out there working in the fields and pulling plows and doing wagon rides the rest of his life. There's very few physical injuries that happen to pulling horses, as far as strains and ligaments and things like that. But Yeah, I have introduced horses to pulling at a very light level, get them out and cross one or two loads as a pair of 2-year-olds. That's more for the exposure to the crowd and the training aspect than anything. 3-year-old will compete at a low level a little bit. 4-year-old, we're still kind of cautious. When they're 5, they're kind of expected to go out there and do their job. But when they're 6 and beyond, they're really ready to go physically and mentally. And on the other end of the spectrum, I think people are throwing away horses way too young. If you have a 13-year-old draft horse, it's not going to bring half what a 9-year-old draft horse does. There's 10 more years of work in that horse for me. I mean, I can't believe what people think is old. And even at a competitive pulling level, they can pull well into their teens and at the highest level. A friend of mine, Ira Kessler from Columbia Crossroads, Pennsylvania, had a horse he started pulling in the lightweights as a 2-year-old, and just tremendous. One of the best lightweights ever. And he pulled him every year. And when that horse got to be 18, he decided he better retire him. He's pretty old, and there's got to be something better out there. And every year from the time the horse was 18 until he was 23, Ira would get another horse to go with him, and he wasn't as good. And so he pulled the old boy out of retirement and pulled him another year. And the healthiest horse. He looked young, even way into his 20s. And so I think all the physical work is good for him, and good for their longevity, as long as they're well worked and doing it the right way.
Absolutely. I can remember when I was in college working for a horse trainer starting colts, there was an old Methodist preacher, and he would bring a colt every year, and he would always use that colt to plow his garden before he brought him to us. So he would be broke to drive and everything. And every time, like, I could climb up on that colt for its first ride, and that thing already knew how to work on its butt and pivot across, and like, my first week of work was already done by the time it came in, even though it never had anybody on its back or legs or anything. Like, it always amazed me how much he was getting done with that horse just by driving him around and plowing the garden and all that stuff. Do you find that to be pretty true, that there's a real good translation from driving, or would there be difference, like, for logging versus pulling a wagon or something like that, or is it pretty much the same cup of tea, or what?
No, you need to, pulling a wagon or general farm work is, you're not asking a lot of exertion at one time from the horse. Logging, it can be a tense situation. It's as much work for the horse as it is us when we go to the woods and start cutting trees and lugging a chainsaw around and hooking chains. And they need to be absolutely on the top of their game, even just driving, even just prompt about, when I say the word to turn a team right is G. And when I say G, they better jump to the right, because it could be saving the cart from tipping over or getting out of the way of a obstacle or something like that. Or maybe at the last minute, I saw something I was about to run over and I had to turn the team. And the pulling, they have to really kind of learn that slowly. Otherwise, you'll hurt their confidence. But I do agree that the basis is there. They drive, you just need to kind of improve that a little bit. The fundamentals there, if a team's broke to drive, if a single horse is broke to drive. I don't know much about riding horses at all. I've never had an issue riding a draft horse. If they're broke to drive, I get on their back and I ride them. And I don't know what I'm doing. I plow rein and I say gee and ha and whoa. But I've never had an issue getting the horse to do what I want under saddle. Anyway.
Is there very much difference? Like, I would assume as you're starting one of these, you're going to drive them first as a single. So is going from a single into a team a big change for them, or they fall right into that pretty naturally, or what?
Yeah, that's seldom a big change for them. A lot of people, and we used to do it some, and I don't anymore, break them in a team. I used to do it with a 3-horse hitch, and we'd put the young one in the middle. And we've done it in a team, a pair before. But now I do them all single, and I do a lot of groundwork. And no, introducing them in a team is generally pretty easy. Some of the mares might be a little nasty to their teammate, but they get over that when they realize they can't get away from work by doing that or something. Sometimes it can be the other way. If a horse has always been driven in a team, it's hard to get them single. They're used to a horse leading them or being beside them. And of course you get buddy sour. If 2 horses have been together their whole life, they do tend to get buddy sour, and they don't like to be separated for much time at all. So that can be an issue. I switch sides with horses a lot. And I don't usually find it to be much of an issue as far as they're not uncontrollable or out of hand or anything. They just tend to pick up bad habits and maybe lean more toward the other horse or pull their head toward the outside or something like that. And so switching side often prevents that. It's also kind of like rotating your tires. It puts the harness and the pressure points and everything in a different spot, and it kind of like if you were carrying something heavy over your shoulder with a shoulder strap, some luggage to the airport, and you've got to walk a long way. Pretty soon you're going to switch that from one shoulder to the other and kind of give this one a rest. And that's kind of what I do when I switch sides. I try to switch sides at least once a week with my teams.
I feel pretty validated hearing you say that. I've always had the same thought that it makes no sense why the one on the right couldn't go to the left, and that it seems like it would do nothing but good to swap them up. But I've always heard the opposite, that if a horse is broke in this position, then that's his position, and you don't ever change that, and that's what they do. And I've kind of always thought that there's no reason why that should be, but
it shouldn't be. And if you go to a horse auction, that's a mark of good training. That's what the auctioneer will say when a team comes in the room. They'll work on either side, and you can't hook them wrong. And that's what they mean. They'll work on either side. They'll work single or double or in a big team or anything.
So here's a question that I have gotten, and I don't mean this to be offensive or anything like that, but the use of blinders on the horses. I know that is just, set in stone with the driving world, and I'm sure there's a reason for it. I know enough that if something's been around for hundreds of years, there's probably a good reason for that. At the same time, I just don't understand it. Like I would tend to want a horse to be able to see everything going on. So what's the deal? What am I missing with blinders?
I got called out on that just the other day, and my friend is not wrong. That we've always done it that way, and we've always done it that way. And I never even realized you could. I didn't grow up around riding horses or anything. I didn't hardly realize you could drive horses any other way. There is a small safety aspect to the horse itself. Like if you're in the woods or something, they're a little bit like a safety shield almost to protect them. It does keep a horse calmer, especially a skittish horse. A lot of equipment has a lot of moving parts, a lot of farm equipment, and they can't see that, and they're not as likely to be scared. But that's my best answer. We always have used, and I hate that answer, but that's the truth. We always have used blinders. I'll let you in on a horse pulling secret. So if you see a set of open blinders on a team at a horse pull, the teamster's up to something. and what they do is there's usually a guy driving the team and 2 people hooking the horses. And that horse and he's never been without blinders. So he kind of scares him anyway, and he's a little nerved up. And what happens, you'll see the hooker, the guy that just hooked the eveners, he'll wave to somebody in the crowd, or he'll tell the crowd to quiet down, or he'll pretend he got his fingers pinched and throw his arms, and that kind of scares the horse, and away they go.
Little gasoline on the fire.
And I tried that once, and with Roy and Libby. I still have Libby. She's 25-year-old, but boy, I'd been knocking on the door of winning some horse pulls, and I just couldn't get there with this team. And I thought, boy, if I open those blinders up and maybe have somebody wave, and that just might do it. I'd never tried it before. I put open blinders on them, and I drove them around the fairgrounds before the pull, and I thought they're going to fall asleep. Usually if they've never had open blinders, it scares them to see the world and all that's in it. Little kids were coming up and patting them and playing with them. I went around that arena twice, and the third time I had all I could do to handle that team. They were a handful once they realized they could see everything. And the end of the story is we didn't pull a bit better. It didn't do me any good. But there is a trend, and it's a fairly new trend, and there's some good horsemen doing it who drive with open blinders, and they get a little more communication, and they like it. They just like the feel of it, and so you are starting to see some of that. And I guess there still is the thought that we don't want the horse seeing what we're doing back there. We don't, if we're waving something around or moving something, we don't, none of their business. Do what we tell you. And there have been blind horses that do a great job as a draft horse, and that are naturally blind. So I don't know. It's a fascinating subject to me, and I don't have the answer I'd like to give you. I don't have a lot of science behind it.
I would think intuitively that for, albeit what is a huge animal, they are still a prey animal and used to having their eyes see almost 360 degrees. So I would think that by limiting that, it would actually make them insecure. But I mean, evidently it doesn't, or maybe just the nature. That was my next question. If the drafts had a different reaction to that than, say, a Morgan or a standard bred, or I mean, it's used universally, but I would think those hotter type horses would become even more insecure doing that. But I'm totally on the theoretical side, and there's still people that have been doing that for decades are still using them. So
only to a small degree are they insecure with blinders. For instance, if a horse always has been hooked on the left, and you hooked them on the right, and somebody walks up on that right side, they've never seen that before, and they don't see you coming, and they might, who the hell's there? Or any horse, no matter what side they're hooked on, if they're wearing blinders, sometimes they just don't know you're there, and you go up to swat a fly or something, and they might misread you if they're not paying attention. I mean, I was always taught to get a horse's attention before you get up close to them. So, yeah, I'm going to give some credit to the guys that go without blinders, and I probably am missing a degree of communication, and I probably am closed-minded. It's probably something I should explore a little bit more.
I've got a few other kind of direct questions about that sort of stuff. So, one of the videos that I've watched, and this is one of those videos I go back and check out periodically just because I think it's cool. But they've got, I think it's pronounced a Brabant, which is Belgium looking but kind of roanish, and it is logging. And this thing is massive. It'd be one of the biggest drafts I've ever seen. Like, it's got to be that 2,200 pound kind of horse. And it's completely at liberty. The guy has no driving lines on him whatsoever. He's just giving voice commands. And I mean, you could tell this horse is in the zone, completely obedient. He's having to move left and right to kind of break the log free, and all this power that he's got. And I mean, they are as much a team, man and horse, as I've ever seen in any event or show ring. And then the horse finally breaks the log free and calmly walks it out and everything. But the guy doesn't have any means to touch that animal, no rein, no anything whatsoever. Is that him showing off, or would that be commonplace or what?
No, I don't think that's him showing off at all. And that can be commonplace. That's one of the first stories I hear when people see me logging with horses. My grandfather used to have a team in the woods, they'll say back in the 30s or whatever, and nobody drove them. He'd hook them to the logs and they'd go to the landing on their own. And they do reach that degree of training. I've never asked that. I shouldn't say never. I've had teams that would do that, but I seldom ask that. I have to be with them anyway. Horses tend to cut cross lots if you're not specifically driving them. If you kind of like going back to driving a horse trailer, if you go around a corner in your town and you don't make a good wide corner, you're going to run the curb over with your trailer. And it's kind of that way logging with a team. If you left them on their own, they'll just cut that corner short and bind your log and get in a mess and mark up the young trees too that you don't want to do. Every time you get friction against one of those trees, you cause future damage. I grew up around an old fella that used to log with horses and mules back in probably the 30s and 40s. And he said a pair of horses would get hung up on a tree root or something, and they just stand there and wait for the teamster to come along with a PV and roll it out of the way and help them or drive them. The mules would get hung up on a tree root or a stump, and they'd pull to the left and they'd pull to the right, and they'd go until they figured it out. And I kind of believe that. Well, of course I believe that. The old fellow wasn't lying to me, but I've kind of experienced some of that myself. They say the same thing with mules. If you're, and my experience with mules is limited. I've trained 2 in my life, so I don't know a lot about it. But they tell me, and the one that I did work with, they tell me if they're cultivating a garden, and so you don't have to turn so sharp. You get to the end of one row and you skip 2 rows and you come down, so your turn isn't as sharp. If you did it that way this year, that mule will remember that next year and do it the same way again, whereas horses wouldn't even remember what county they were in last year.
So would you say that you feel like these animals do exhibit a work ethic? They understand that there's a job here to do and they really are trying to get that job done, or is that too strong?
It really feels that way. I mean, I always say I'm not into the woo-woo stuff, the Warwick Schiller stuff, but I am. And then after I say that, I'll give you an example of me being into that stuff. And yeah, I feel like they feel like there's a sense of purpose. They know the landing's filling up with logs, and they know that we're hauling hay back to the barn or turning furrows. They feel like they're a part of something. It's a sense of purpose, I think, is the word I would use, and it's just a different feeling working with horses when they know they're achieving something for the greater good, and I mean, they don't break that down into intellectual thoughts and realize that, boy, I'm going to eat this hay next January that I'm putting in the barn this July or something, but they do realize that they're helping and a part of something. I can believe that much of it anyway.
My next question is, so let's say you are logging. So that means you've got a team out there, or at least a team, maybe more than, a pair. You've got chainsaws working, you've got trees falling, and it wouldn't seem like it's practical that there's always someone that is standing there holding the team. So how do you deal with walking away from these animals? Like, I'm assuming hobbling isn't what's going on there. Do you tie them, or are they just given a verbal command and ground tie, or how does that work out?
My horses probably would stand for 3 hours, and they've done enough logging that they wouldn't do anything. I still don't give them the opportunity. We tie them. We carry ropes and tie them. And it's kind of funny. We tie them to a weed tree, a tree that isn't going to be much good because they'll chew on the bark out of boredom, and you don't want to damage a good tree that might be your future. That's another debate I shouldn't make it sound like we have big debates in the draft horse world and we hate each other. It's something we knock around a little bit among ourselves, whether we put halters under bridles or not. And I'm a big person to not have halters under bridles. And I tie my horses by the bit to a tree, and I go cut another tree. But I just don't like the way the bridle seats. I don't like the look of it. I hate to get that mark from wearing a bridle all the time across the bridge of their nose, wearing a halter. And but I understand everybody's point of view that says we should wear halters under bridles. It's much safer to tie them, especially when you're working multiple teams. And in the case of a runaway, I knew of a bit that broke a couple of years ago, and people were trying to catch this team after the bit broke, and there's nothing to grab onto. And if they would have been wearing a halter, they might have stood a little more chance. So I'll understand all the reasons. I don't like the aesthetic of it, and I don't think it's comfortable for the horse. And if you look back in old pictures, you never see a team wearing a halter under the bridle. You didn't start seeing that until the 90s. Look at old draft horse magazines. And I don't remember a lot of runaways or a lot of issues that would have been prevented if there was a halter under the bridle. So I tend to not be a fan of that, but I'm not going to pick on anybody who does it either.
Everything kind of has its own pros and cons, so you sort of pick the poison you're comfortable with, and you deal with the consequences. And I would imagine those animals working as hard as they do, and they get used to the situation. They come just like ranch horses. When you give them a moment to rest, they tend to appreciate it, and they're happy to do it, and they're not necessarily looking for, something else to do. They tend to. It's part of being broke, right? They're just happy to sit there and be a horse and not work
and
for a
the
little while. So.
Even very well broke draft horses in the woods, the one place they get in trouble, they'll just start eating leaves or brush or something, and they'll walk over here and there, and even, they'll wander 3 feet away, but next thing you know, that can lead to trouble. It's not like standing in an arena where there's nothing for them to eat or be distracted by. So it's just one of those things. I tie them even if they don't need it. It's just a good practice. I was going to tell you, maybe I should tell you on the podcast, and tie the two conversations together. The Brabant Belgian that you saw in the logging video, that's what our Belgians used to be in America. That's when they first started importing them from Belgium. And we kind of bred them a different way, and they bred them a different way back in Belgium. They actually bred them for meat, so they got even bulkier and stockier. But really, at one point, there was no difference between a Brabant Belgian and an American Belgian, and the two breeds went different ways, kind of like Morgans have, I guess. They went different ways in the types.
And is there, I don't deal a lot with drafts, but 90% of the drafts I see are Belgians. Are they kind of the 800-pound gorilla of the draft world, or is that just what I'm seeing here in the Southeast? But if I were in Pennsylvania, it would be different, or what? See, even like mules. I've dealt with a half a dozen Belgian mules. Like it's if I'm dealing with draft here, there's a very, very strong chance that it's Belgium in some way.
Belgians cross really well on a mule. It's they're dominant, probably 2/3 Belgian, and then the next big share is Percheron, and you're maybe down to 10% or less of Clydes and Shires, and Suffolk. The Suffolk breed is quite similar to Belgians. They're a little shorter, but a little more muscular, and they're going to make an impact over the next 10 years. The numbers are increasing.
So on the horse logging, I guess the big question I have is, why are y'all horse logging? Why not just skidders? And like, I'm in Louisiana, and logging is a really big industry here, so I've seen the equipment and stuff. Is this an accessibility issue, or just y'all would prefer to do it with horses rather than not? Or maybe the land is designated from 1920s that only horses may be allowed to log in here, or like, what's the deal? Why still horses?
Some of everything. I love working horses, and it's a chance to efficiently work horses. And it's a really good opportunity to make some money while working horses. It also is so much of a better job in the woods. Just low ground impact. Horses can do a remarkable job. They can be quite efficient as well by getting some good production out if everything's done right. Now, with that said, about the better job in the woods, a careless horse logger can still make a mess. Maybe not so much with ground impact, but by the way he falls trees, the areas he works, the trees he skins up, and a careful guy with especially a smaller log skidder can do a remarkably good job. But the ground compaction is just plain there. And the ground compaction is limited. I had a girl come up and did a study on this once. Just plain limited to where the horses step. When you're logging with equipment, even moderate sized equipment, there's a lot of ground compaction where the actual skidder drove. And as far as 4 and 5 feet away, there's still ground compaction. It kind of comes in waves. And it affects the ground there. Now, with that said, you get some unsightly roots and things like that, but generally, just like your salt lake, a woods is resilient and will grow back and can grow back well. It's just unsightly and a mess. And you can really screw the drainage up too with big equipment, and you're not likely to screw the drainage up with horses on steep ground. It's just something I love. You know, I love working. I don't have to log with horses. I choose to log with horses. And to be honest with you, when I started logging, it was a lot cheaper to log with horses. That's not true nowadays. I could get a log skidder for $20,000 that I could make a living with. You know, a small skidder for around here, a cable skidder, a very old used one. With horses, you know, you couldn't hardly get a horse trailer for $20,000, and you're going to spend, you know, 10 each at least for a good team of horses, and then all the equipment and harnesses and the skills it takes. So it's not cheaper anymore. So it's a labor of love.
I can believe that. And I guess I'll just tee up this softball for you. Most people, I think, would imagine that these big horses really eat a ton. So what is their diet like? Are they eating that much more than a normal sized horse, 1,000-pound horse?
Not unless they're working. When they're working hard, it's absolutely remarkable how much they need to eat. But when they're not working hard, no, they tend to be pretty easy keepers and stay in good flesh anyway. We've always figured a bale of hay a day per horse, and that might be a little on the high side, but it's an easy number to figure. 40-pound bales we always figured around here. A working horse can, especially a big heavyweight, can eat upwards of 30 pounds of grain a day, but you feed it in 3 different intervals. You know, most of the good horsemen now are in our draft horse world are trying to feed in shorter intervals, 3 times a day as opposed to twice a day. 20 pounds is nothing. It's easy to feed a team 20 pounds. And they need that. They need the energy. You know, all the knocks people have on oats, that benefits a team of horses that's working that hard. The energy and the carbohydrates, and it just it benefits a hard-working team. I can totally understand that if a horse is not working hard, that oats are not the ideal feed. And even with hardworking horses, it's still, oats alone aren't the ideal feed, but it's pretty darn close. And any good feed, any mix you make is largely based on oats by a large percent.
Mhm. I would imagine, like, I know in my mind, when I think of most of these draft breeds, I'm kind of thinking of cresty necks and insulin resistance, but I would imagine that's also in a world where those horses aren't actually working. And so what I'm thinking of is a sedentary animal that's in a state of metabolic dysfunction. And if that animal is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing every day and being fed like that, then it probably would be rolling, like you say, on into its mid-20s and just fine, and none of these problems. And we really do way more damage with the sedentary lifestyle we offer them than we realize we do.
Yeah, that's quite true. And it doesn't even have to be working. Just turnout is such a big thing. You know, my horses get turned out every day in the winter and every night in the summer, whether they're working or not. Even the working horses go out and stretch their legs and stuff. But yeah, the exercise is a big key. I haven't seen it happens, but the metabolic diseases, I haven't seen a lot of that in draft horses. Some of the pony breeds tend to carry that more than the draft horses. It's hard to go wrong feeding hay, and a lot of hay, you know, and adjust the quality of your hay, you know, as long as it's safe hay. But it's just hard to go wrong. You're not going to put a hay belly on a horse if they're working and getting the exercise either. That's a horse that eats a lot of hay and doesn't get exercise tends to get a hay belly. And what you were saying on being overweight, some of those 2,500, even some at 2,300, some of those really big heavyweight horses and even hitch horses, they are fat, but they move like a ballet dancer, and they're in such good shape. They can go, you know, they can go pull a 1,500-pound load a mile without resting. And just because they're in that good shape, you've got to build the muscles before you build the fat. You know, and one reason we like big horses in any weight class, just plain more weight in front of the sled, or the dynamometer is a truck that we pull on, a little bit similar to a tractor pull type of truck. And the more weight you put in front of it, the more strength you have. That's why in the old days, carrying cargo, the Army used to instruct the teamsters to ride their horses up the hills to just put more weight in front of the wagons.
So I did mean to ask you this earlier, but would you break down some of these competitions for us? Like is it a weight pull to failure, a sliding scale like they do have in the tractor pulls where the weight is moving up a hydraulic ram to a forward position, or are they doing like a powerlifting match where first they try to pull 1,000 pounds and then 1,200 and then 1,400, and how much would we expect a 2-horse lightweight versus heavyweight team to pull? Like, what's a reasonable number there? That's a lot, but
Yeah, it is, and there's quite a lot to think about there. Your typical horse pull, and there are variations, are a weightlifting competition. Everybody hooks to the lighter loads, starting at maybe 3,000 pounds. And almost everybody is still in the contest of, just for easy numbers, if we have 10 teams. Usually all 10 teams are still in the contest until we get to maybe 5,500 pounds. And then some start to drop off, and until there's only one team left. Now, we rarely pull them to their max capacity. The same as a weightlifter doesn't go in the weight room and lift all he can. He works in reps. We get 3 around here, and this is kind of the standard. We get 3 chances at each weight. So And usually the first two are consecutive. You can try twice, and most people only try once unless they really didn't get off to the start they wanted or something like that. And then you go to the end of the lineup, and on your third chance, a lot of times you have options. You can hook to either end of this stone boat loaded with weight, or you can have it spotted with a tractor somewhere on the track and go back and pull it. But one of the biggest keys is to stop the team while they're still pulling. You don't want the team, you want it to be your idea, not their idea to stop. It's a big factor. It really helps your horse's confidence. And there's a lot to judge there. Maybe you just don't stand a chance of winning. Maybe you're outclassed. Why would you pull your horses so hard and ask that much? You're not going to physically hurt them, but why take that out of, why push them to their limits when you don't stand a chance of winning or even getting near it? I guess I should talk about the distance.
What would constitute like a qualifying? They have to move it 10 feet or move it at all, or what is the?
Typically, it's 27 feet 6 inches, and there are variations. They're going to start pulling in Florida here in February. They have a circuit down there, and a lot of people from all over the country go, and they will go 20 feet, and some year they're going to change that to 27.6, which is more standard. But the New England states do a lot of short pulling, they call it, even as short as 6 feet and up to 12 feet and 15 feet. Throughout where I live and all over the Midwest, 27 feet 6 in one continuous pull and staying inside of 2 15-foot boundary ropes is the standard. I was reading about years ago when they wanted to standardize and come up with a distance, and how they came up with 27 feet 6. They wanted it to be a long enough distance that a team couldn't bump the load and get it there. And yet they didn't want to go so far that it was inhumane. And so they came up with 27.6, and it was kind of an arbitrary number. They just had to come up with a number.
Yeah, that does seem oddly specific.
And it seemed to be a pretty good number. And believe it or not, as short a distance as that is, you really have to have a team in shape. It feels like a marathon to pull a heavy weight that far compared to only going 6 or 12 feet. Generally, not all the time, but the horses are pulled on a flat bottom sled with a hook on each end or a loop on each end. And you pull this sled, and we keep adding weight, quite often 1,000 or 500 pounds at a time. A couple variations. There's a pull up in Cherry Springs, Pennsylvania. I think I've got second place there a dozen times, and I've never won it. We actually pull on logs. We use the actual really big logs for weight. And until 2 years ago, we had to hook our own horses with no help. And then there's something called the Buckeye sled, which, as the name would indicate, comes from Ohio. It's a flat bottom stone boat, and we load it with concrete blocks. You don't need a loader present is one advantage. You have to walk beside the Buckeye sled. You don't ride on it. You walk beside it. So it's a little more fair in that regard. If you've got a 250-pound man versus a 105-pound man, he better be riding racehorses if he weighs that little, I guess. But anyway, and it's a challenge for some people to walk beside they don't do as well walking as they do sitting behind the team driving. And then in the 20s, the University of Iowa, in an effort to keep horses relevant and stop losing the battle and losing ground from tractors, came up with a dynamometer. And it's mounted on a truck body, quite often a 2-ton truck. Ours is here in New York State is on a Freightliner FL70 or something. They're just kind of a medium duty truck is what they're usually mounted on. And it's a hydraulic resistance type of weight. And the weight of the truck doesn't factor in. It's how hard these weights pull up on a pulley system, and the hydraulic resistance can be really hard and adjusted very consistently. And a lot of horse pulls are pulled on that. It's kind of a fair system of pulling because we have standard numbers that mean the same everywhere. If a team crossed 4,000, we call it, that registers in our mind. It's the same in Vermont as it is in Michigan or Indiana or Florida. On a stone boat, there's so many factors with ground friction that a team might cross 10,000 pounds one week and only 5,000 the next. And sometimes that's on the same track. With that said, your average lightweights, at least where I live, pulling 27.6, on the sled we use, we're usually around 8,000 to 9,000 pounds, and the heavyweights get up to 10,000. On the dynamometer, an average pull, you'll get a couple good teams of lightweights qualify for 4,000 pounds, and the heavyweights will get up to maybe even 4,500 pounds on the truck style pulling, the dynamometer. And they did not build that truck for entertaining horse pulls. They built it to measure horsepower and to see what horses really produced for power. And within 2 years, it became a big draw for county fairs and for horses to pull on that truck.
No, I like that a lot. I'm also a little curious. So I went on YouTube and I watched some of this stuff, and it was very obvious these horses know what's going on and they are excited to do it and anticipating. I mean, you just see them quivering, and they're backing the team into position. I forgot what you called the piece, but when the two guys on the side hook it in, and I mean, it is like a hair trigger and wham, and you know, all that power coming. So how physical is this? Like, do people get hurt? Is handling the team, you know, you better be kind of bowed up on those reins and in control of things?
It's kind of funny. One of the best horse pullers out there is 105-pound tiny Lori Root. And Lori reads horses as well as anybody I've ever met. And her brother's a big, strong guy, and he'll be driving a team, and he can hardly handle them. They're all over the place. They're acting bad. And Lori will give one suggestion. Maybe it's change a bit or drive from the other side, or, you know, don't pull on the lines until the last minute. And they'll do whatever Lori says because she knows her business and everybody knows that. And all of a sudden that team, a little kid could have hooked them on, you know. And Lori herself has to compensate. She's tough, but she doesn't have the strength of a 200 and some pound guy. And she drives a lot of teams herself and has to learn to compensate with skill. But with that said, they do get keyed up. Even my horses get keyed up. It doesn't look like I'm doing much, but I have my hands full. I mean, I've got my hands full to get them back there and hooked evenly. We want an even hook. We don't want one horse ahead of the other. We don't want them hooked too loose. There's some things you see at a horse pull that I don't like, that I just plain dislike and turns me off. I'll tell you that. And I try not to do that stuff myself. And injuries can happen. Sometimes somebody doesn't get their finger out of the way often enough. I've seen very few. I had a friend who got ran over by a truck last year with his lower legs, and he was hurt but not disabled for life or anything. He was back to work within a month, but he had his little boy driving, and he was driving the team in. And actually, it was the hooking the horses on and everything was executed. And he was walking beside the truck as his son was pulling the horses. And the mud flap on the truck stuck out about 2 inches from the body, and it caught him on the leg and pushed him under the wheels. My friend I just referenced, Lori Root, got hurt real bad. She was standing by a horse. She'd been hooking it, and something broke on the harness where the actual tug, the leather part, hooks to the collar. And that horse, it caused that horse to come around so fast, and it pinched her. The horse stepped on her and pinched her between the load and the horse, and she got hurt pretty good. I mean, her leg was really, really broken. It was in two pieces that are about 5 inches apart from each other. And she might be the toughest person I know. A year later, you can't keep up with her if you wanted to go walk or even probably on a jog if I know Lori. But it's rare. I'll say this. The first time I announced a saddle horse show, I saw more people leaving an ambulance and more injuries in one weekend than I had in 25 years of pulling horses. So it's rare. It's rare for the horses to get injured as well. But we do have our hands full, at more than it looks at times, and they do get keyed up, and I feel the same way. I'm not impressed no matter how well they pull once they're hooked to that load. If they act like idiots to a large degree, I'm not impressed. And that's just me. Some horse pullers don't care. Some horse pullers try to make them that way. But I heard on your podcast that it could take 8 people to lead a barrel horse to the ring sometimes, or the dressage horses tend to blow up. And, you know, I think we should be better than that. And that's competition at its worst. You know, you might be able to win a competition, but, you know, how proud of yourself can you really be if that's what it takes to get a team hooked or to get a horse to the ring or something?
Yeah, I agree. That being said, I do think a lot of people that haven't ever dealt with a draft horse might be, you know, we think of them as gentle giants. So like it wouldn't be really common for you to be driving a pair and want them to canter, for instance, because they can kind of get too much of a head of steam, right? And the wheels could fall off. Is that fair to say? Or
we just don't canter draft horses. If you watch the hitch horses, it's all done it's kind of like a standard bred at a race. You get points taken away if you break into a canter or a gallop and out of a trot. So we don't do that. And I don't even trot horses much. I'm not in any hurry. We don't need to race them. And, you know, when these horses are that muscular and that big, that's a lot of stress on their feet and legs to trot. But yeah, you don't see canter much. And maybe some of it's they're hard to rein back. When I was a kid, we had that pair of mares that was half quarter horse and half percher on. And, you know, know nothing, fear nothing, my grandmother used to say, and I'd let them go all the time. I thought it was fun. I thought it was chuck wagon races or something. And I'd always get them, you know, pulled back in. But there's some of everything. And you know, most of the equipment we're hooked to isn't made to go fast. So we stay away from that. But most horses have never had an opportunity to canter in the harness. You know, they don't know they can.
I know on the riding side, like sometimes when they find out that they can, it's like trying to stop a train. Sometimes like once they get to enjoying it, or if they get to bucking or something, like God help you trying to stop a Belgium that wants to buck a little bit, because you're not going to just pull on the left rein and that's going to be okay. You know, you're way out horsed if things get to that point.
Oddly, I've had 2 times where I've had horses that I couldn't get reined back in from a canter down to a walk. The one time was the oddest thing ever. We're going to have a picnic with the kids, and we were out in the middle of nowhere. They were all set up with some food and stuff. And this team worked every day and was so well trained. And they were on a wagon, and I went to swing in there, and I have no idea what scared them. They took off running. And I mean, I'm a 230-pound guy, and I couldn't get them slowed down. And they didn't, but there wasn't much we could hurt. We stayed in the road, and there were dead roads. You didn't get a car a day on that type of road. And I headed them up a big hill. And by the time we got to the top of that hill, they were on a walk, and they never showed another sign of that. And I had another similar story with a different team, maybe 5 years earlier. Those are about the only 2 times in my life where when my hands were on the lines and I felt like I couldn't control it, or I more than felt like I couldn't control it. But both times I had enough open road and no traffic and enough hills that I just let them go till they were tired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the same with runaway horse. Sometimes you just don't fight it. You just let it run its course and everything is fine. That's the best way to handle it, riding them. So you mentioned clipping manes, and I'm going to throw in there docking of tails. So what is that all about? Is that still common practice? And I'll also throw in there, if y'all didn't know this, the song Jingle Bells, Bells on Bobtails. That's what they're talking about is draft horses with bobbed tails. So what's the deal with that?
Excuse me. So the first thing is the dock tails. And that comes from the show industry, and it's a long tradition. We probably brought it with us from Europe, or European horses, which most of our draft breeds are. In fact, all of our draft breeds are. The Clydesdale Percheron, Shire, Suffolk Belgian Percheron. I said Percheron twice. See, I like them. All the common breeds you see in America are of European descent. And they dock the tail, and one reason is on the 6 and 8 horse hitches, you're less likely to get a tail stuck under a line where you can't regain control of your team and get that line out from under the tail. I'm sure there's some fashion to it also. It makes the horse's rear look bigger and more muscular to have a smaller tail. Now, general work horses and pulling horses, we don't dock their tails. That's also fashion. We don't run the risk of getting a line hooked under a tail as often as the big hitches do, but they separate themselves by that. The pulling bred, they're all Belgians, American Belgians, or Percherons or whatever, but within the lines that are specifically bred for the horse pulling ring, they call them long tail. That horse is long tail bred on both sides of his pedigree. And so we distinguish ourselves that way. As far as the mane, clipping the mane, it's not a look. We like the functionality of it. We like to keep that mane clipped so there's no hair under the collar. And the long hair doesn't rub between the collar and the horse's neck. Also, everything just seats better, even all the way up on the bridle. It seats better. That's why you clip a bridle path on a lot of breeds. And my favorite reason, it doesn't, you can see an injury or the beginning of a sore, or if your collar's not fitting good, you can see it at a glance and treat it, where the long hair can hide it. A lot of guys also clip the legs, and I know a lot of the draft breeds are famous for their feather, but from a functional standpoint, that can be a nightmare. They can be prone to scratches and just mud and ice and that type of thing. And so we clip the legs up to just below the hock or the front knee, and nothing will freeze to them. And we can see a swelling or an injury or scratches at a glance, and you're not likely to get scratches with the hair gone, and it cools a little faster. So as far as the clipping manes and clipping legs, it's strictly functional is why we do that.
Are you big on removal of ergots if you have any horses that are growing that, or is that super common with those breeds?
I don't think it's any more than any other breed, but no, I mean, sometimes we'll be trimming feet or shoeing a horse or something, and if we see one that's a little long, we might, clip it. But I never know where the line is on that. So it's like your fingernails. You can cut it, but you don't want to go too short. And I don't know where the line is on that. I don't want to cut it too short and hurt the horse. So I kind of stay away unless it looks ridiculous or something.
And then lastly, I'll kind of ask you about shoes with these horses. So I don't know how you feel about this. I will say this: we have kind of this movement of barefoot versus shod and this debate and everything. And I kind of am a farrier. I don't really do public horses, but I do my own. I have for a dozen years or so. And one of the things I don't think a lot of people understand is that you can do things traction wise with a shoe that you just simply can't do without a shoe. And that can go both ways, like a sliding plate on a reining horse or a calf roping horse, or like heel calks and tow bars and things like that for more traction for these horses that are still being used in agricultural settings. So are you using shoes predominantly for this? Is that a absolute must, or do they go pretty well barefoot, or what's your experience there?
When a horse is logging in the woods, it's an absolute must. Like you said, traction and protection. When I'm competitively pulling, it's also a must for me. Some light farm work or even fairly heavy farm work, and just a general horse that doesn't get hooked very often, it's not a must for me to have them shod unless there's a reason, unless you need to correct something or change something. Or this time of year, we get a lot of ice, and some horses can get pretty tender walking on the frozen ground just outside in the lot by themselves. There are different types of shoes. The first is a big, almost square shoe, literally the size of a dinner plate, and that's called a Scotch plate. And like so many of our things in competition and with horses, I think that started in a good place. Scotch plate obviously came from Scotland. It's a Shire tradition, or a Clydesdale tradition, rather. It's very exaggerated. I mean, we're putting a size 10 shoe on what should be a size 6 hoof. They flare out. It's very long toes, which can be detrimental to any breed of horse. It's just the leverage of it just doesn't work. It's a trend in the show world, and it gives a horse a lot of action when you see them trot so pretty and they really show the bottoms of their feet. Some of that's a result of the Scotch bottoms and the way they apply them. And like anything, if it's done correctly and well, you're doing a good job, and things are very acceptable. People carry it too far, and they put a lot of big rubber pads on there and filler and spacing. And you don't see Scotch plates in the working horse world.
Yeah.
Now, the next type of shoe is just a regular plate, not just kind of what you'd think of with any riding horse. We put some spots of a wear surface on there, drill tack or boreum. We usually put one spot on each heel and 3 across the front. Just gives the horses some traction and protection. A lot of farm horses wear them, and a lot of logging horses. I put them on my logging horses sometimes. The next step up, I run a little bit heavier stock steel, a nice heavy steel, but I do still stay with a flat shoe. And I put quite a bit of drill tack or boreum on there. I like the heavier steel, just a little more protection for the vigorous logging. The same as I wear a bigger, thicker shoe, work shoe on my own feet, logging, than I do a lot of other activities. And it provides good traction as well. The third is our pulling corks. And they are a shoe with as much as an inch long cork on each heel. They're rolled down into a cork, not quite a spike, but a inch wide by inch long cork and a toe cork across the front of the shoe. And a lot of pullers and some loggers use them exclusively. I don't. And I mean, I'm not against them. I'm not going to speak out like I hate those shoes. I don't run them on my own horses. The horses up off the ground, the bottom of their feet tend to dry out a little bit, and they're hard to keep on a horse. You know, they tend to come off real easily. And I don't find the traction that much better. There are some cases where I wish I had that traction, but I get beat for a lot of reasons in the pulling ring at horse pulls, but it's never because of traction. In fact, a lot of times my horses with the flat shoes get better traction, and I'm one of the only teams that didn't slip all day long on a muddy track, and all the teams with the other cork shoes did. And that goes into your body position of the horse, how they hold their head, how they engage their rear end. And you can do that through driving in bits, and you can do that through your, what we call your draft, how your collar fits and how it's hooked. And if everything's good there, you can get a lot more traction, and the horses learn to use their feet well without the big shoes. I know my next door neighbor's a race car driver, and you know, he can get as much out of a car with a smaller tire than, you know, some of these classes. Everybody runs the same tire, but you can run any engine you want. And a good race car driver can really set that car up to get a lot of traction, even with the limited tires. And it's the same with horses. It's a lot of physics and a lot of balance and a lot of the way the horses move. Some of it's even conformation in the horses.
So what about oxen? Now this is where I really get kind of I'm excited about this. First of all, since this is something most people would be removed for, would you describe for us exactly what an ox is?
Yeah. Well, I wrote an article years ago about oxen, and I started it by saying oxen, like heroes, are made, not born. And that the truth of that is, any oxen are traditionally steers. They don't have to be, but they usually are. There's only a few exceptions to that. They can be cows, just like mares can be a workhorse. But any breed cow, any breed out there of cattle can be an ox. Castrated is best. So any steer can be an ox. The difference between an ox and any other steer out in the pasture is the oxen are trained. And that's about the only difference. Oxen should have horns. For one, that's how they hold a load back or back up a wagon or something. The yoke rides against their horns and they push it back. If they didn't have horns, if we used Angus or something like that, and the oxen put their head down, the yoke would fall off. Oxen are trained to do, and we start at a young age with oxen. And by young, I mean bottle calves, month old, sometimes less. And we start training them. And they're really easy to train. You know, I would say if you love oxen and you're passionate about it and you dedicate the time, even if you're not a good trainer, you're going to end up with a good product. Whereas horses, that's not the case. If you love horses and you're passionate about it and you dedicate the time, you can still have a subpar product. You still need some more skills. Now, to reach that highest level, there's a major difference between, you know, that's when the trainers show up to reach that highest level. But to get them trained to a level 6 or 7, just about anybody can do it that takes the time. Oxen we use just like draft horses. They can pull wagons, plows, you know, logging. Anything you do with draft horses, we do with oxen. We drive them with a wooden yoke. made of hardwood. Elm is nice. I have an elm yoke. I meant to say birch is preferred. The bows are the arched part that goes under their necks, usually made of hickory, sometimes ash, but usually hickory. And we drive them with a goad stick, just a whip is essentially what it is. No ropes, no haulers, just walk beside them with a goad stick. Your body language has to be a good ox teamster. Your body language has to be a 9 at a 1 to 10 level. And your voice commands come into play a lot there as well.
So I've seen you were talking about doing them younger, and I have very limited knowledge about this, but I just want to throw this out, that they would pick a pair and they yoke them when they're babies, and that pair never changes. They'll go up together. They're yoked all the time, pretty much. They'll change to larger and larger yokes as they grow, but the left one's always the left one, the right one's always the right one. They're going to work together maybe until, if one of them dies or something, then you'd have to change the pair. But it's very much of that's a lifestyle kind of a thing. Is that true, or am I misguided there?
That's quite true. Not 100% accurate. In the New England states, starting at Vermont, even in Massachusetts, even some of Eastern New York, and I'm in the Western part, so I have to travel a long ways for this, but they have a big oxen culture, and it's a long tradition, and they have a lot of pulls up there, competitive pulls. Some of the pullers will switch teammates with time and maybe even switch sides, but in general, you're right about what you said. They find a teammate when they're a calf, and they stay with that teammate for the rest of their life, and usually the same side, because there are commands that are specific to one side or the other. Oxen can get as big as a horse, bigger than horses. I saw an ox. I've seen numerous ox that weigh 3,200 pounds for one single ox. I've drove a lot of teams of horses that have only weighed 3,200 pounds. Generally, I mean, those are your really big ones. They're Chianean crossed or full Chianean, a big Italian breed. Generally, they're 1,800 to a ton in that neighborhood, and some of your smaller breeds tend to be less than that. We like dairy breeds, Holsteins, Ayrshires, milking shorthorns. Beef breeds work fine, especially if they have horns. They tend to get fat. They tend to just carry too much flesh and be slow. Oh, brown Swiss is another breed that can make a good one. The dairy breeds tend to turn their feet into energy a little more than the beef breeds. A cross is really nice as well. If you have a dairy beef cross, I had a pair of Holstein crossed with Limousine that were a good team. The Canadians can do things a little different. They'll use what they call a head yoke, and they have a beautiful tradition up there, and mostly Nova Scotia, up in Trailer Park Boys country. And they carve the front of their yoke with absolute precision to fit the back of the oxen's horns, and they strap it to the horns really tightly. That's how they work their team. And they probably have a little advantage over our bow yokes that are American, in that when you see two bulls fighting or pushing on each other, they're pushing from the horns, not the top of the neck. In those Canadians, they really take pride in that. They have matched teams. They really like Herefords or a Hereford cross, and they are matched beautifully and well maintained, and just a high standard. But as far as the American teams and the bow yokes or any of them, pound for pound, they're not as strong as a horse. They just won't pull as much. Sometimes oxen will outpull horses because they just get bigger. I told you, I've seen teams that weigh 6,500 pounds for the pair. It's rare to see a team of horses weigh 5,500 pounds. So you're talking 1,000 pounds bigger. And sometimes they can move more weight. Where the oxen shine is the more adverse the situation. The deeper the snow, or the more slippery the mud, or the deeper the mud, or the more brush you want to walk through, the steeper the hill. Oxen tend to outshine horses when it gets adverse. The colder it is, but not true in heat. They don't like heat.
Would you say that has to do with the shape of the hoof, because they're going to have a cloven hoof so they can affect the terrain a little bit differently, kind of grab
does.
in
They're
there a little
very
more?
sure-footed with that hoof. And oxen can be shod, by the way. They wear 8 shoes.
Kind of a half moon on the outside of each
exactly.
hoof.
Yep. A lot of times they don't need to be shod, but they can be shod. And sometimes they need if they're going to be on ice or heavy logging or something. Some of it's because of their calmness, and some of it they're everything's simple about oxen, from feeding them to driving them, and their equipment is simple. And there's not a lot of harnesses to get caught in the brush, and there's not a lot of straps, and you're not driving with lines. You're just, I can walk on one side of a tree and my team on the other, and I just walk right around the tree. So they're really unique like that. They're very cooperative. It's hard to believe, growing up in dairy country, when I first started seeing oxen, I'm thinking, I can't get cows to come in out of the pasture and go to their stanchion. How the heck do they get them to do all this stuff? And it's just a repetition from when they're young, and like horse training, it's an exercise in not letting them do the wrong things. Mm-hmm. So my interest in oxen, because we don't have a strong oxen culture where I live. I used to pull horses at the Warren County Fair in Pittsfield, Pennsylvania. And a guy who became a friend named Howie Van Ord had oxen there. And he had a very strong 4-H program, as well as many adults that he had trained to make oxen and all the equipment that goes with oxen. And I used to watch his show and even his pulling contest down there. And I got fascinated by it. And I got into that same thing myself from watching Howie. And he was kind of my mentor in teaching me. And from there, I got quite taken with it. And I've been as far away as Freiburg, Maine, and up to Massachusetts for contests. I've had friends come out here with their oxen. We've had as many as 8 teams from the New England states out here before. So one of the best things about me learning about oxen as an adult, it put me in touch with what it's like to be a beginner at something. I drove horses since I was 7 years old. Sometimes I don't know what it's like to not understand this, or not know what the command is or something, because it's just ingrained in me. And once I started driving oxen, I could understand, oh yeah, I get why you don't know what to do. And the one thing I learned about oxen that I've related to, well, lots of things I've learned that are related to horses, but the biggest thing is, if they know whoa, and they stop when they're supposed to, and every time you can regroup. And it's the same with driving draft horses. If they know whoa, you stop and regroup and think about what you want to do and try it again. And you can't get in much trouble as long as they stop when they're told.
So I have another question for you. You had mentioned that they're typically steers. So there's a technical definition there. A steer would be a male that is castrated prior to sexual maturity. And if they're castrated after sexual maturity, so that would be after 18 months, 2 years, something like that, then they would be called a bullock. And if they are allowed to become a bullock, they're going to develop the secondary sex characteristics. So a much larger neck, squarer head, and all of those things that we think of when we think of a bull. So when you're saying steer, is there an actual preference there? And I guess if you use a dairy breeds, then like that's another thing. Dairy breed bulls, a lot of people may not know this, but dairy bulls are notoriously mean as hell. Like will kill you mean. Like we think of bucking bulls in the PBR and that kind of thing. Like dairy bulls are absolutely no joke. They are legit mean. And so how does that work out? Are bullocks seen, or is that antiquated, no longer a thing, or is that more the mainstream, or what?
I don't think you see bullocks much. Most oxen are, and technically, it's kind of like when you stop calling a filly and call her a mare. Oxen are called cattle or working cattle until I think it's supposed to be 3 years old or something. But most of them are castrated between 6 months and a year old. They're give them time for their urinary tract to develop more before castration. Some people do it younger, and some wait until they're closer to a year old because they like those male characteristics. A little bigger head, the horns look a little different. And some castrated at the same time, two full brothers. Well, they usually half brothers, but two brothers castrated at the same time. One will show a lot more bull characteristics and one will show a lot more steer characteristics. So it's just like us. There's different levels of manliness in us.
Absolutely. So one thing you may not know, my wife's side of the family, they raise show cattle and predominantly Brahman cattle. And so we are actually pretty regularly halter breaking calves and showing them and stuff. And I can definitely tell you that there's a big difference between an 18-month-old bull and a 2-year-old bull. Like there's something in that 6-month period flips a switch, and a lot of them will go from puppy dog to maybe we don't need to handle him today, a little more on the dangerous side of things. I also, she's in the room right now and she's going to hate me saying this, but I find cattle, and I've worked a lot of cattle in my day, cattle are dumb as a post. Like compared to a horse is a genius. Like, I mean, they're different species, right? But in terms of like number of commands they could learn and intelligence, I feel like that's why you start with them young and they kind of learn it that way. So do you find that to be true in terms of what you're teaching them or length of time that it takes to get them to figure things out?
I don't know if I would call them dumb as a post compared to, by the way, I have a rant about dumb as a post too, as it relates to horses, but I don't know as I'd call cattle dumb as a post in training. They're much more dependent. They need you to tell them what to do. They don't think for themselves. They're a little less challenging. There's definitely differences within the breeds. On the bottom end of the spectrum would be brown Swiss, dopey, dumb is a word a lot of people use. And then on the high end of the spectrum would be maybe an Ayrshire or a Devon is a rare breed that's very smart. Chianean are another one. Quite often the smarter they are, the harder they are to train. I really don't know as I'd call them dumb. They're different than a horse, and we don't have the tradition and we don't have anybody on the RFD channel in a round pen with oxen teaching us how to do it, and we don't have a big cottage industry of people doing clinics and stuff, so we haven't researched it as much. They're definitely different, and they probably are not as smart as a horse, but I wouldn't call them dumb as a post. And I would have before I started training cattle, before I started training oxen. I definitely would have. So, and if you don't mind, I'll go into a rant on, and maybe I should have said this as my my pet peeve in the horse industry. People who say there are no dumb horses. To hell, there's no dumb horses. There's a whole world full of them. And I'll agree there's a lot more dumb owners than there is dumb horses, but if you can't say there's no dumb horses, then you can't say there's no smart horses. And there's definitely varying degrees of intelligence within horses. And I get it. And I fully agree with them that a lot of horses that people think are dumb are smarter than the teamster, the trainer. But there's, try training a basset hound to fetch a stick, and then try doing it with a border collie, and you'll realize there's dumb and smart in the animal world.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, kind of like you're talking about with the cattle. A lot of times the dumber ones are easier to train. It may take longer to get the point across, but once they've got it, and they don't figure out ways around it. Sometimes people think they want a smart horse, but a lot of times that's the worst kind of horse like a novice could get. You want the one that's dumb, no question.
We recommend brown Swiss for beginners to train, and then your second team get something a little sharper, a little more challenging. But don't start with the biggest challenge right off the bat. And it's exactly what you said. They're a little more cooperative and a little dumber. I like brown Swiss. I don't really mean that as an insult, but you know, I mean, I'm a little dumber than a lot of people who went to than people who went to Ivy League schools. I mean, it's just a fact of nature. There's dumb and, you know, there's intelligent and less intelligent, if we wanted to sound a little better about it, I guess.
Yeah. Do you find that there's a difference with them in terms of like foot speed? So in other words, if I had a team of horses, I would drag 5 logs to the trailhead where the oxen team would drag 4. I'm just going to be quicker and a little more productive with the horses, or not really?
It's a little bit the tortoise and the hare. The oxen are so steady. They're slower, but they're steady. And they can be close to, and it's variable from job to job, but they can be close to as efficient as horses. If you get on a long skid, I was on a bunch this summer that were upwards of a mile long, where I had to pull the tree from the woods to where a log truck could reach it. You'd fall way behind with oxen quickly. But if you're on a short skid, you might outpace horses because they're so simple and your equipment's so simple. You can hook and unhook so much faster. A really short skid or really steep ground can be more challenging to horses. The foot speed is variable among different breeds of oxen as well. Like a Devon tends to walk pretty fast. Maybe even an Ayrshire walks fast. But we don't use Jerseys much. They are used, but not a lot. They're flighty. They don't stay focused on work. But a Hereford can be slow, and so can a brown Swiss. Some of the Holsteins can be fast just because they're long-legged. But you should teach them to walk at your pace. You know, I've seen older men who had a limp, and the ox walked right at their pace. It's all body language, and you stay right by that left front shoulder. And if you speed up, they do, and if you slow down, they do. And to a large degree, it's hurting cattle. Driving oxen is hurting them.
Mm-hmm.
And
that makes sense.
When they're younger, they walk too fast. I mean, most any breed will tend to walk faster than you're comfortable with until they get a little more mature and worked in. I like to walk right in front of my teams if they go too fast, because they're not going to run you over. They're just not going to knock you down and run you over. And I definitively set the pace when I do that. But they don't quite walk. Even a really good fast stepping team doesn't walk as fast as a horse. I know it's hard to use a team of oxen on a mowing machine because they just don't walk fast enough to run the mechanism. I have mowed with oxen, but I had 2 teams, and I'd switch them out every hour so they were fresh and still walking nice and fast. Whereas you don't have to do that with horses. You can hook to a mowing machine and work all day.
I guess the last thing I'll ask you, and this would still be kind of a horse question, but you had sent this to me, and I have seen it before. It is a drawing, and it's got 2 teams going uphill, and it kind of has one team with the lines tight, and they kind of have the neck curled, a little, what we might call a little flexion in the riding world, and then the other team, the reins are slack, and the horse is in a little more of a neutral position, walking a little more freely. And so there is some debate as to which of those positions would be preferable. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an old English sign is what it is, from some kind of a driving stable or something. And the spirit of that sign is definitely right. And the horse in that sign on the left you don't want a lot of flexion. You don't want them to pull their chin back. They're generally overbitted, or somebody drives with a really heavy hand. They're not comfortable. And the horse on the right stretches his chin right out and walks at a nice pace. We want up-headed horses. Not, it doesn't have to be to any extreme. You know, the show ring is pretty extreme because it looks nice and it gets a lot of action with their feet when they trot. It throws their feet out in front of them a lot. But you don't want a low-headed horse either. It throws them off balance. They're trying to pull from their front end, not their rear end. Also, just the anatomy isn't set up that way. The collar chokes the bottom of their windpipe when their heads are low. And everything lines up better when their heads are up at a nice natural position, not unnaturally high. The horse collar rests against the full surface of the collar bed, against the horse's neck, all the way across, and everything's seated well, and they can pull comfortably. When the horse's head is down low, the collar hangs from the top of the neck, and you really only have one point of surface there. There's a lot of different ways of achieving the proper headset. And that's where a lot of the argument comes in. Some of it is just plain driving with different hands on the lines and having them right. Some of it, along with driving, is bits. Some of it is simply conformation. And some of it is your collar and draft and having everything fitted just perfect for that individual horse. When I say draft, if you had a pickup truck with 40-inch tires on it, big tall lift kit, you couldn't hook to a low trailer with that truck without changing something. And that's how it is with horses. If we're going to hook to something with a low hitch point, like a plow or a stone boat, like we do at a pulling contest, we have to change that draft where it hooks onto the horse's neck differently than if we're going to hook to something with a high hitch point, like a wagon or my log cart or something like that. And it just balances the horse better. The best teamsters can fully comprehend the balanced draft idea and what makes them balanced and what they need to change. And they don't have a clue that they have that knowledge. It's just, they do it and they know it. And oxen are no different. You don't have bits. You don't have a physical check of any kind on oxen, but you do have a yoke with a lot of adjustments and built different ways. If you want your team to walk faster, you put your yoke one way. If you want them to lift and pull hard, you build your yoke a different way. And the last thing that I say about that, and I think it's very underrated, is your posture and your body language. And maybe we're getting into the woo-woo stuff that's not proven with science, but if you look through photographs of horsemen, people that slouch and drive and hold the lines in a way that's not confident. H.L. Mencken said, one day a downright fool will inherit the White House. No matter what side of the political spectrum on, I think people will agree with that with some of the choices we've had. Mm-hmm. We just might agree in different ways. But anyway, H.L. Mencken said he held the lines like a man dealing cards, as opposed to a nice, confident manner with your hands at your side. And if you're slouched and holding the lines like a man dealing cards, it shows up in your horses. Your horses they're just not paying attention. They have a slouched body language, and it just conveys that message right through those lines. And if you stand up straight and shoulders back and take a deep breath, your horses look the same way. And it works that way almost every time. And I don't know how you'd verify that and prove it other than look at the proof. And oxen are quite the same way. So I think you can get them in the right position by putting yourself in the right position.
Well, I would say there's not any question in my mind that sort of feelings and emotions translate through the reins. So if a rider is nervous and holding things a little more tightly or whatever, the animals will feel that. Likewise, if someone is more confident, I can feel if my horse is nervous through the reins and so forth. So
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
may be less aware of that than they are, but as they are pretty much emotional beings, that's all they've got to go on. So that makes perfect sense to me.
At the
But
beginning of the podcast, Pipsqueak told you he drove a team at a horse pull and won the trophy one year. And Pipsqueak's always joking around, and my invisible friends are always joking around. And that's a tick that I do to prevent being nervous when I'm about to hook on. It just, if I do that, it distracts me and I'm being a joker, and I'm not worried about, gosh, what if I go make a fool of myself or something? And it,
mhm.
and that translates. I read a book about trap shooting with shotguns once, and the book never mentioned what shells to put in your gun or what choke to use or how far to lead or what stance to use. It told you to step up to that line and draw a deep breath and put your shoulders back and think of all the preparation you put into this, and then go execute it. And the author had the same book with a different slant for shooting pool, for playing golf, for shooting free throws. And he could have written that same book for horses. And I think that's what the horses are feeling. And I think if we do that more often and just feel our confidence, and remember, we've put lots of hours into this. We've watched your bit class. We've listened to the right trainers. We know what we're doing, and believe in that, we'll execute it a lot easier, and the confidence will just be conveyed right to the horses.
Absolutely. Brandt, I have truly learned a ton in this episode. This really has been one of those itches of curiosity I've been wanting to scratch. So I certainly appreciate you coming on and kind of answering a lot of these questions of mine. I find this really interesting, and I hope I get to put in a position where I get to see some of this firsthand at some point and play with some of these big horses. So thank you very much for coming on and enlightening us. Brandt, I don't ever want to forget about our sponsor for the episode, so if you'll indulge me with a moment or two, I will pay the bills real quick. Our sponsor for your episode is the Mini Draft Horse Ranch. Big fun comes in little packages. Have you ever wanted to drag semi-heavy loads but don't have the space for a massive draft horse? Let's be honest, hauling in the family Christmas tree doesn't need a ton of horse. Why not downsize the horse and upsize the fun? The Mini Draft Horse Ranch has you covered. It's unfortunate, but today's modern Mini is a cluster of genetic and conformational problems. That's why we decided to turn to cutting edge science and stick with the Percheron and Belgian blood that's been working for generations without fail. Originally a horticulturist, our founder, Elmer T. Plowski, spent his life working with growth retardants to make plants that would be trees into ornamentals. It was 1 year while working on his sequoia bonsai after hauling in the whole township's Christmas trees the day after Thanksgiving, as God intended, that Elmer realized his passion and his profession were destined to meet. It took several tries, but we're now able to breed full-blooded draft horses and have them stay fun-sized. They are the perfect scale models and have the same work ethic and mental acuity of those hard-working drafts. If you're interested in a fun-sized draft horse, get on our mailing list. We can't say anything official yet, but you might be sure to watch the Super Bowl this year, where you may or may not witness the mini Budweiser team roll out a full-size keg at halftime. The Mini Draft Horse Ranch, where big fun comes in little packages.
I like that. Yeah, great.
So that was what I came up with anyway.
All right.
All right.
Well, I really enjoyed doing this, enjoyed getting to know you, and we'll stay in touch and look forward to listening to your upcoming podcasts.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay. We'll be in touch. Yes, sir. Bye-bye.